the Imperial Era from scratch. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 226 Resurrection of Megatron. Sean was contemplating how to find a stable job in Wintertown. David, on the other hand, was contemplating how to successfully conquer the northern plains. His original plan was to wait until the Orc army besieged Snowford and the defenders could no longer hold out, then he would make a grand entrance, seize command of Snowford and effectively rule it. He would then wipe out the Orcs and make the entire northern plains his own. However, after visiting the Dark Elf ruins and learning from the High Priest, who was either a ghost or not, he realized that things might be more complicated than he anticipated. The Orcs might possess some powerful mystical power, and a god stood behind them. Snowford might not survive this winter. To prepare for this eventuality, David began his second round of preparations. The Spartan I will form the Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment. Start recruiting the Spartan II, with an estimated capacity of 200. Let's recruit 300 for training. At its peak, the Spartan Kingdom boasted a population of tens of thousands, so a few hundred men seemed a simple task. But that was the total population. David wanted the best and strongest young men. The initial 100 men were already the cream of the crop in the Spartan army. This was the only way to complete the military training in Wintertown. David retained all of them in Wintertown, forming the new Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment. This was just the beginning. David planned to have a tentative strength of 300 men. Of the newly recruited 300, 200 would be retained. The remaining 100, rather than being eliminated, would be tasked with training the Spartan army in Sparta. If all went well, the Kingdom of Sparta would become Wintertown's primary source of reserve troops. He wasn't worried about Tyndareus's displeasure. He knew from Helen how he felt about the king. As he helped him train powerful Spartan soldiers, his image as a god would become even more ingrained in him. Perhaps Sparta would become Wintertown's first otherworldly vassal. To ensure the success of this plan, David had Helen bring back golden apples to her parents and brother, guaranteeing their long-term and stable rule over Sparta. Furthermore, of the 50 newly recruited local soldiers, 20 were ultimately retained to serve in the Order of Winter. The remainder, rather than being wasted, were immediately assigned to the new sheriff, Elizabeth Swan. The Wintertown Police Brigade was officially established, with Hot Rod, the Squirtle, and the others becoming members. At this time, Sean, with his extensive experience in law enforcement, applied for a position and was naturally given a valuable position. Sean became one of Elizabeth's deputies, providing the young sheriff with valuable experience to help the brigade get back on track. Furthermore, through Elizabeth, Sean could more quickly understand the situation in Wintertown. Whether he could advance to replace Elizabeth as Wintertown sheriff, or even obtain another position, depended on his performance. David merely glanced at these matters, a fleeting anticipation in his mind, before setting them aside. He could no longer maintain the same level of attention he had in the past. As Wintertown gradually expanded, the number of both locals and newcomers increased, and he couldn't keep tabs on everyone's situation. Just like the Transformers relocation. If David hadn't approached Optimus Prime and asked him what he thought of his intention to recruit the Decepticons, he wouldn't have known that Optimus had already given up on Earth. As for the Decepticons, as long as they were willing to coexist with other races and refrain from provoking war, Optimus Prime had no objection to their joining. After all, Wintertown's first warship, Skyfire, was once a Decepticon. And Mini Constron, currently assisting in the Winter Camp's logistics department, was also a Decepticon. Given that Megatron hasn't been resurrected, the Decepticons have long been without a strong leader, and their internal unity has long since weakened. If Optimus Prime could speak with the Decepticons and explain that he has found a new home for Cybertron, there's a reasonable chance they'd come to Wintertown. However, whether the Decepticons would be willing to follow David's leadership remains to be seen. Actually, there's a simplest way to get all the Decepticons to join Wintertown. What's that? Conquer Megatron. Megatron held immense prestige among the Decepticons. Soundwave and Shockwave, two highly respected Transformers among the Decepticons, were Megatron's diehard fans. Therefore, conquering Megatron would be equivalent to conquering the Decepticons. But was Megatron so easy to conquer? David seriously suspected that the Optimus Prime before him was a fake, or had Quintessa sent to brainwash him? Just as he was debating whether to call an ambulance and give the Autobot leader a thorough checkup, Optimus explained, "My teacher suggested this." Oh, that Archimedes. David had previously warned Optimus Prime about the location of the leadership module and the presence of a Cybertronian ship on the far side of the moon. Optimus knew all about it, including the fact that the Archimedes government within had long since formed an alliance with the Decepticons. But David had no idea how Optimus Prime handled all of this. It now appears that Megatron has been rescued and revived by Optimus Prime. And when Megatron discovered his death, it seems he wanted to use his own hand to resurrect his ally. So, you're trying to use this opportunity to expose Megatron's true intentions, and then, no, I simply hope to change everything before something irreversible happens. Optimus Prime, looking at David, finally expressed his thoughts. Resurrecting Megatron would solve all the problems at once. At this point, Optimus Prime suddenly changed the subject. I've seen the diggers you resurrected. They have simple, kind personalities. Oh, David suddenly realized that this was Optimus Prime's plan. He then looked at the Righteous Prime in surprise. He had never imagined that the Righteous Prime would have such a plan. But it wasn't surprising. He was the leader of a faction, after all, so he couldn't be some naive chauvinist. Moreover, from a broader perspective, this method would directly save almost all of Cybertron. The Cybertronian civil war would end here, and the two factions of Transformers would join forces in Wintertown to build a new home together. As for the losses? What about Megatron? He's already dead, so he doesn't need to be considered. The method isn't much different than creating a fake Megatron to impersonate the Decepticon leader. It seems quite feasible. David thought further. What if he simply absorbed Megatron? By taking on the identity of Megatron, would he gain the Decepticons' approval? If this strategy worked, would it mean the Decepticons would become his loyal troops? Maybe the Decepticons aren't that stupid. He didn't have high hopes for his ability to perfectly impersonate Megatron. Soundwave and Shockwave, especially, weren't so foolish as to be unable to tell the difference between them. After all, David and Megatron's personalities, speech styles, and actions were vastly different. The most reliable solution was to resurrect Megatron, preserving his original personality and methods while implanting a supreme command, absolute obedience to David. As for whether Megatron might indirectly control the Decepticons and raise doubts among them, having Megatron show some modest ambition should appease them. For example, occasionally expressing the idea of waiting for the right time to take over and rule the world might help. There are risks, but compared to the rewards, they're entirely acceptable. If handled well, the Decepticons will be content with their new home and perhaps even less inclined to follow Megatron in his rebellion. After all, who wants to go hungry and fight against others every day when they have a good life to live? After thinking for a while, David decided that Optimus Prime's suggestion was worth implementing. It would be best to first communicate with the Decepticons and reach a consensus. I know what to do. Optimus Prime prepared to contact Soundwave and Shockwave immediately. He didn't have to worry about finding them. The Archiman would surely know how to contact the Decepticons. As for the humans, if the talks with Soundwave and the others went smoothly, he might have to say goodbye to his human companions. This didn't mean the Transformers had completely abandoned that world. They could establish a base on a planet near Earth and maintain limited contact with it. The Knights of Winter, Spartan Eyes, Decepticons, Wintertown's military strength had been significantly strengthened. David turned back and began to inquire about the Dark Elf situation. 2 Dark Elves had finally been rescued from the assault ship severely damaged by Skyfire and RC. One was the ship's lieutenant, the other a common sailor. Both were fortunately in good condition after treatment. As long as they survived, Wintertown was capable of treating them. Interrogation revealed that the Eternal Night Empire had only sent one assault ship to pursue Cecil and Enid, siblings, with no other support or assistance. David nodded to Eva and instructed Tony to set up radar and mechanical outposts to the west. He then turned his attention to Snowfort. Snowfort, which David had focused on, was in dire straits. On the broken city wall, Maddox Hawk, the former deputy commander of Snowfort and now the commander-in-chief, looked at the increasing number of orcs outside the city and asked again the question he had asked countless times: how long will it take for the reinforcements from Iron Tree Fort and the kingdom to arrive, my lord? Even if the reinforcements from Iron Tree Fort arrive, it will take at least half a month. At present, the only way is to ask for help from Baron Glamorgan of Wintertown. Maybe that pink dragon can help us hold off the attacks of these orcs and hold out until the arrival of reinforcements. Maddox Hawk hesitated for 2 seconds, looked at the soldiers around him who were almost all injured, and the many civilians who helped defend the city, and finally made a decision. Ask for help from David Glamorgan of Wintertown. Chapter 227 Reinforcements from Wintertown. A letter requesting assistance from Commander Maddox Hawk soon appeared before David. David examined it. It contained only a few words, describing the dire situation Snaufort was facing. Snaufort currently had over 200 fully armored infantrymen remaining, all of them wounded. The 100 archers originally sent in for reinforcements still had over 80 remaining, but their bows and arrows had been expended, leaving them with few remaining. The 100 knights of the Iron Tree Knights had also lost over 30, leaving fewer than 60 still capable of fighting. While the reinforcements Iron Tree had initially sent to Snaufort hadn't suffered heavy losses, they were now in poor condition, nearly all wounded. The physical and mental drain on the soldiers was immense, and no one knew when their complete collapse would occur. Snaufort, a crucial fortress built by Iron Tree on the northern plains, itself had a garrison of 100 fully armored elite infantrymen, 30 knights, and 20 archers. However, after the arrival of the reinforcements and the official start of the battle with the orcs, these troops had been entangled. In addition to the elite troops, 1,000 auxiliary troops recruited from Iron Tree Keep had also been deployed to the battlefield. The losses were even more devastating, with nearly 300 dead. Local farmers in Snaufort, as well as those previously recruited from surrounding villages and towns, had also been issued weapons, and women and children were also involved in logistical support. To repel the orc invasion, Snaufort had mobilized every available force, but now they were almost unable to hold out. Sir, Snaufort desperately requests support from Lord Glamorgan. The knight before him was Maddox Hawk's personal guard. Maddox could only entrust such matters to those he trusted most. He couldn't trust anyone else. Rest assured, as the Lord of the Kingdom of Tiran, I will not sit idly by and watch my kingdom's territory be overrun by a horde of filthy orcs. David read in the letter what he most desired. Maddox, the current commander of Snaufort, stated that he would relinquish command to Lord David Glamorgan upon his arrival. Once David holds this command, no one else can reclaim it. With this letter requesting aid, he can legally occupy Snaufort and transform the entire western half of the northern plains into Wintertown's territory. He can then apply to upgrade his territory from Wintertown to Wintercity, and Goldfinger will be upgraded again. What changes will this time? He waved his hand, signaling the knights before him to rest temporarily while he discussed the details of Wintertown's military deployment with his men. Generally, messengers requesting aid are also tasked with providing battlefield intelligence, and this meeting wouldn't preclude them. However, Wintertown's situation was unique, and the knight knew that Maddox Hawk's request for aid was essentially a sacrifice to protect the civilians and soldiers of Snaufort, even at the cost of his own future. Even if Snaufort successfully resisted the orc attack, and its civilians and soldiers escaped, Maddox Hawk himself would face a difficult fate. On the surface, Iron Tree Keep wouldn't do anything to him, but secretly, he'd be ostracized and marginalized, until his death. But what could he do? Guard Lemuel felt Maddox Hawk had made the right choice, at least for now. He had a chance of survival. As for his future, if he couldn't survive, there was no future at all. Regardless, he had successfully delivered the letter of aid to Baron Glamorgan. Judging from the Lord of Winter's reaction, he would surely intervene to rescue Snaufort. Maddox had already brought Snaufort to the Lord of Winter's doorstep. No lord would miss such an opportunity. He glanced around, his preoccupations having made him oblivious to his surroundings. Only then did he notice what a beautiful, magical city Winterfort was, including the Glamorgan castle he was in. It was the first time he had ever seen such a bright, clean castle. Gareth Stanton, R.C., Krauser, and the others immediately rushed to David's office. They had more to discuss than just supporting and capturing Snaufort. David needed to determine the current status of all available military forces in Wintertown. Although 20 of the 50 Winter Knights are new recruits, their superior equipment and the training of veterans ensure that the Knights' combat effectiveness remains at a high level. Furthermore, Gareth Stanton and Floyd recently received official recognition from the Holy Light, becoming true Paladins. Baptized by the Holy Light, they possess even greater combat power, unleashing the maximum potential of the refined and finalized Blizzard power armor. The Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment currently utilizes traditional armor, but with the advantages of their crystal mineral weaponry, they have no problem dealing with ordinary orcs. The members of the Winter Knights utilize a variety of extreme training methods inherited from the Tiran Knights. This requires the highest level of personal skill from the trainees, supplemented by specialized medicinal herbs to ensure their bodies are not damaged by the training. But in Wintertown, the Winter Knights, protected by the Holy Light, no longer needed drugs or other magical or alchemical aids, allowing them to pursue their training beyond their limits without risk. This was a crucial factor in the Winter Knights' rapid growth in combat effectiveness. Liadrin and Sally Whitemane played a significant role in the Order's establishment. With Floyd and Gareth Stanton becoming true paladins, the Winter Knights' combat effectiveness could be further enhanced. The Spartan Infantry Regiment employed a similar training method, but the Spartans had a lower starting point than the Winter Knights. The Winter Knights' original members were elite soldiers recruited from Tiran, already exceeding ordinary strength. Later additions were primarily Azerothian artisans, who were no ordinary individuals. The latest recruits, who ultimately remained, were still primarily Azerothians, starting from a higher starting point than the Spartans. This circumstance allowed the Winter Knights to skillfully utilize power armor. Otherwise, if the physical fitness was not up to standard, power armor would not only fail to provide beneficial effects, but could even pose a life-threatening threat to the wearer. While the operating system, courtesy of Tony Stark, has made the suits much easier to operate, at least there's no more twisting your waist 180 degrees with a single turn. Ordinary soldiers, without the assistance of a super AI like Jarvis, lack the necessary reflexes to keep up with the enhanced speed and, naturally, cannot unleash their true combat potential. Therefore, the Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment currently uses traditional armor, waiting for their capabilities to improve before transitioning to power armor. The Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment is fully deployed this time. David will bring 30 of the 50 members of the Winter Knights, with Gareth Stanton deciding whether to bring new recruits or none at all. 10 more will be stationed at Frostwatch, meaning only 10 Winter Knights will remain in Wintertown. While it may appear empty, it's not. Most of the Transformers have already arrived in Wintertown. Even if RC follows him out to fight the orcs, Wintertown is still garrisoned by a host of Autobots like Digger, Jetfire, Hot Rod, and Drift. The establishment of the security brigade also ensured a human presence within Wintertown, ensuring no problems would arise within the territory. James Norrington and Floyd will remain at the barracks training new recruits. Have the second batch of Spartans arrived? The second batch of Spartans, requested by Helen, had all arrived in Wintertown. According to Gareth, they were learning the common language of Brunia and undergoing basic physical training. After assigning their duties to the military leaders, while Gareth was mobilizing the troops and making preparations for their departure, David called Weatherby, Eva, and Elizabeth and told them he was going to Snowfort and that they would be responsible for the security for the time being. Snowfort wasn't far away, and in an emergency, David could transform into a Tomcat fighter jet and return with a handful of fuel. So, after giving a few casual instructions, he went off to find suitable candidates to accompany him on the expedition. He first sought out the Inspector, a rare Autobot transformer capable of transforming into a military vehicle. He possessed formidable firepower and defensive capabilities, a type of combat perfectly suited to his strengths. Furthermore, Medivh and Jaina both expressed a desire to visit the front lines. They were deeply curious about the orcs of this world. Sylvanus even brought along a spellbreaker and ranger guard. With the addition of Renaer Mograine and Sally Whitemane, Winterfell was taking this expedition very seriously. This was ultimately driven by the information they had gleaned from the Dark Elf ruins. Jaina and Medivh were eager to see what was truly behind the orcs of this world. So, when Lemuel received word that Winterfell's reinforcements were fully assembled and about to depart, he was met with a scene. 2 Quinjet fighters were parked, and dozens of knights, clad in thick, seemingly heavy armor, filed into the giant birds' bellies. 100 heavily armed heavy infantrymen, under command, boarded the massive wagons, but Lemuel saw no animals pulling them. Baron Glamorgan, the Lord of Wintertown, clad in a magnificent suit of purple gold armor with shoulders radiating golden light, was speaking to several elves. Lemuel had never imagined that elves existed in Wintertown, and that these elves were now going to support Snowforest. The scene seemed a bit too fantastical for Lemuel, who had fought elves countless times. Chapter 228 Taking over Snowfort. Because of the elves' presence, It took Lemuel a while to notice the two mages carrying long staffs. There are mages in Wintertown? More than one. In the eyes of the people of Iron Tree Keep, Wintertown was just a remote rural town. Even though it had become a direct territory of His Majesty the King and received town-level treatment, they didn't take this so-called Wintertown seriously. And as for Baron David Glamorgan, Lord of Wintertown? He was just a lucky bastard. The nobles of Iron Tree Keep were unanimous in their opinion of Baron Glamorgan. His Majesty was just throwing him around to annoy us. For His Majesty's sake, just ignore him. The nobles of Iron Tree Keep continued with their plans, methodically carving up the new pie of the northern plains. However, no one could have anticipated how things would unfold completely contrary to their expectations. The northern plains wasn't a new pie, it looked more like a massive pitfall. The villages established by the nobles struggled to be self-sufficient, and most relied on the nobles to supply them with supplies to survive on the northern plains. If that were all, it wouldn't be so bad. While the northern plains were somewhat barren, the soil was substantial, and potatoes, a newly discovered crop, could indeed be grown and produced there. Considering that growing potatoes in Iron Tree Keep yielded more food, a lower yield in the northern plains was acceptable. The worst that could be done was to strictly control the size and population of the villages. Once the land was secured, there were always other avenues for development. The northern plains seemed like a promising pasture, and some nobles were already considering focusing on animal husbandry. However, no one anticipated that the troubles of the northern plains went beyond the mere barren soil and harsh climate. The orcs, a barbaric race never before seen, suddenly emerged on the northern plains, posing a serious threat to the safety of the people of Iron Tree Keep. In comparison, the elves of the Iron Tree Forest seemed a minor threat. From initial caution, to the discovery of the orcs' growing numbers, and finally the destruction of several villages in the eastern part of the northern plains, their limited supplies plundered, the nobles of Iron Tree Keep finally realized the true dangers of the northern plains. But having already expended all their resources and manpower, they refused to give up. It wasn't until the orc army threatened Snow Fort that the nobles finally reached a consensus. They had to repel the orcs at all costs. Otherwise, the orc army threatened not only Snow Fort but also those within Iron Tree Keep. However, even after mobilizing troops to support Snow Fort, the situation only worsened. Under these circumstances, those within Snow Fort had given up hope of repelling the orc army and only hoped for support from Iron Tree Keep or the Kingdom of Tiran to arrive soon. It was during this period that news of Wintertown's defeat of an orc army outside Frost Town began to spread within Snow Fort. 6 months earlier, the knights and soldiers of Snow Fort and Iron Tree Keep would have dismissed this news as a joke. But in recent months, the stories of the easy destruction of Ironwater Village and the dragon's protection of Wintertown had become widespread, and the people of Snow Fort had seen the pink dragon more than once. So, when word of Winter's defeat of the orcs spread, everyone chose to believe it. This was also the reason why, in this critical moment, when reinforcements from Iron Tree Keep and the kingdom were unlikely to arrive quickly, he strongly advised Maddox to seek aid from Winter. However, he never imagined that Winter's strength was even more terrifying than the rumors had suggested. No one had seen the pink dragon, and although rumors had spread that Winter possessed another black dragon, no one would have guessed that Winter possessed more than just one or two dragons. Lemuel also guessed that the so-called dragon was some kind of magical or alchemical creation, capable of breathing terrifying flames and carrying more than a dozen heavily armored knights. In comparison, Winter's possession of so many heavily armored knights seemed nothing special, and the approximately 100 heavily armored infantrymen were no longer a shock. As His Majesty's dissatisfaction with Iron Tree Keep reached this point, Wintertown possessed formidable military might, powerful alchemy and magical artifacts, a significant number of heavily armored knights and heavily armored infantry, and even mages. He didn't believe a young lord of commoner origin could have amassed such formidable strength in less than 2 years. The only plausible explanation was that this was all backed by the king. The ultimate goal was to suppress Iron Tree Keep. If it weren't for the orcs, the nobles of Iron Tree Keep might only realize the terrifying presence around them when disaster struck. Lord Hawk's future may not be so bleak. Handing Snow Fort over to Baron David Glamorgan might allow Knight Maddox Hawk to reap a good reward and avoid the oppression of the Iron Tree Keep nobles. As he surveyed the situation, Lemuel pondered whether he should suggest that Lord Hawk defect to Wintertown. Lemuel, pondering the future, watched as vehicles carrying soldiers began to pull off one after another. He realized that these vehicles, likewise, were products of magic or alchemy, requiring no animals to pull them. The inspector's transformed military tactical armored vehicle led the way, followed by an armored Humvee carrying Gareth, Krauser, and several winter knights. Lastly, a troop carrier carrying the Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment. These vehicles were gradually added as the Winter Army expanded, initially imported from the Transformers and Marvel universes. However, the troop transport trucks were manufactured in Wintertown itself. These trucks, manufactured by the Winter Alchemy Workshop, were powered by crystal ore engines. While the production speed wasn't particularly high, and their output wasn't high, they were sufficient for Wintertown's current needs. As the convoy departed, Lemuel boarded the Quinjet at David's beckoning. The Quinjet was fast, and reaching Snowfort would be a matter of moments. David would arrive there first with some of the Winter Knights. While immediately assuming full control of Snowfort, they also ensured it would not be destroyed by the orcs. The Quinjet carrying David and Lemuel was filled with elite troops. Besides David, Laura, Medivh, and Sylvanus, Sharon Rogers piloted the Quinjet. Rainer Magraine, Sally Whitemane, and Gina were in another Quinjet, piloted by Peggy Carter. The two Quinjets flew for only a short while before they were over Snowfort. Lemuel was even gazing inside the Quinjet when he suddenly realized they had reached Snowfort. So fast, with such a rapid speed. Even reaching Ironfort or even the capital of Tiran wouldn't take much time. Lemuel felt he had discovered the truth behind Wintertown's rapid development despite the siege of countless nobles. With such a convenient flying vehicle, both people and goods could be quickly transported and relocated. The Iron Tree Fort nobles' blockade of Wintertown was a complete joke. The rear hatch opened, and David motioned for Lemuel to join him. Lemuel understood this was to identify himself and avoid any misunderstandings. Following David, he exited the Quinjet and, as expected, was met by countless soldiers. These heavily armed soldiers, weapons in hand, carefully surrounded the Quinjet. Strongbowmen were stationed on a nearby high ground. "Don't worry, I'm Lemuel. These are reinforcements from Wintertown." Even if Lemuel hadn't shouted the last part, everyone around him would have known that two massive metal monsters were reinforcements from Wintertown. After all, Wintertown was the only place in the entire Northern Plains to possess such monsters. Although these two new faces were completely unfamiliar, they were still mistaken for Wintertown's captives. When Lemuel appeared, the soldiers sheathed their weapons and revealed a look of joy. To stabilize morale, Maddox had informed the soldiers and the civilians of Snowfort of Lemuel's journey to Wintertown for aid. It could be said that the reinforcements from Wintertown were the primary driver of their perseverance. Now, seeing the reinforcements from Wintertown, along with the arrival of two monsters, they saw hope. David glanced at the soldiers around him. They weren't in great shape, their spirits weakened by the continuous, intense fighting. Their physical injuries, by contrast, weren't particularly severe. Perhaps it was because the seriously injured couldn't have been there. Maddox Hawk was also present, having stepped out upon seeing Lemuel. Naturally, he noticed David, and Lemuel introduced him to the young man in the ornate armor before him, Baron Glamorgan, Lord of Wintertown. Maddox Hawk, acting commander-in-chief of Snowburn Castle and Knight of the Iron Tree Knights, saluted David respectfully. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Lord Baron Glamorgan. Everyone at Snowburn Castle expresses their sincerest gratitude for your special support." While greeting David, Maddox curiously glanced at the reinforcements that emerged from the two giant birds. He was surprised to see mages, elves, and heavily armored knights wrapped in their armor. "You're welcome, Knight Hawk." David, sizing up the commander before him, gave orders without a second thought. "Please brief me on the current situation at Snowburn Castle." Chapter 229 A Little Holy Light Shock. From the outset, Snowfort received strong support from Iron Tree Fort. All manner of manpower and resources were channeled to this patch of land, practically the center of the Northern Plains, to the utmost. Consequently, Snowfort's construction proceeded with remarkable speed. When David first observed Snowfort from afar, it was still surrounded by a simple wall. Now, a simple wall has been constructed around Snowfort. While this wall cannot compare to the massive and imposing walls of Iron Tree Fort, it represents a rudimentary form. Had the orcs not attacked Snowfort so quickly, giving the humans more time to develop it, it wouldn't be surprising if Snowfort had become the most powerful and fortified fortress in the Northern Plains. Unfortunately, the orcs' arrival plunged Snowfort into the flames of war early on. Repeated attacks by the orcs have left numerous gaps in these simple walls. Given the current trend, as long as the orcs continue their attacks, even if they can't penetrate Snowfort through the gaps, they can continue to expand the gaps, weakening Snowfort's defenses. The human soldiers' distractions, coupled with the mental strain, meant the fall of Snowfort was only a matter of time. No wonder they rushed to Wintertown for help. David knew the situation in Snowfort was dire when he received the distress message, but upon arriving, he realized the crux of the matter wasn't just the soldiers' physical and mental health, but also the near collapse of their defenses. Due to the disparity in manpower, once the walls were lost, the people of Snowfort would be quickly overwhelmed by the orc horde. Following Knight Maddox Hawk, David quickly gained a general overview of Snowfort's situation and visited the Wounded Barracks. While it was called the Wounded Barracks, it was actually Snowfort's military barracks. This barracks housed the seriously wounded, and nearby was a designated area for the dead. David noticed that it was already filled with firewood, indicating they were prepared to burn the bodies at any moment. If we can hold out, the fallen soldiers will be sent back to Iron Tree Keep. If we can't, David nodded. If they couldn't hold out, the bodies would be burned to prevent the orcs from harming them. Maddox and his men hadn't expected the bodies of the unfortunate, seemingly uncivilized, alien races outside the city to be properly handled. As for the wounded, David glanced at them again. They were all critically injured, many hanging on for dear life. Perhaps someone had already breathed their last as David observed them. He had originally intended to have Sally Whitemane tend to the wounded, but it seemed their numbers were considerable and their injuries were severe. Even though Sally Whitemane was an accomplished Holy Light priestess, she found it difficult to treat so many in such a short time. I guess I'll have to do it myself. David glanced at his position, then, under Maddox Hawk's puzzled gaze, walked to the open space nearby. Baron, what are you doing? Wait a moment while I take care of these wounded. Handle. Maddox's face changed drastically, and a possibility immediately occurred to him. Just as he was about to speak, his mouth barely opened when a burst of golden energy erupted from Lord David Glamorgan. The powerful energy surge unleashed a powerful gust of wind, nearly sending Maddox stumbling. Fortunately, his armor helped him steady himself, allowing him to regain his composure and witness the entire event clearly. David's body erupted with powerful holy light. As he slowly raised and opened his hands, as if embracing something, the holy light gradually expanded, enveloping the entire snow castle in a golden halo. Within the snow castle, bathed in golden holy light, it felt as if golden rain was falling, though the drops, some like silk threads, others like feathers, fell slowly, allowing everyone to clearly see and even touch them. Along with these extraordinary sights, the soldiers felt their bodies return to peak condition. The fatigue that had permeated their bodies vanished, and the injuries they had sustained during the battle melted away with the rain. Some even removed their armor, marveling at the rapid healing of their wounds. Oh my God! This is a miracle. What is this? I feel stronger than ever. If I leave the city now, I could kill 3 orcs with a single blow. While the soldiers in other areas of Snowfort were completely unaware of what was happening, Maddox Hawk, who was standing close by and witnessing Baron David Glamorgan unleash a vast holy light, was stunned and unsure how to react. This was especially true when he saw some seriously injured soldiers nearby actually sit up or even stand up from their beds under their own power. As time passed, more and more seriously injured soldiers left their beds on the ground, slowly making their way to the relatively empty square. A few looked up at the relentless rain falling from the sky. Most, with eyes filled with shock, hope, and gratitude, gazed at the man nearby, radiating a divine aura. They didn't know who this man was, but they all knew he had saved them. As the first knight knelt before David and expressed his gratitude, more and more knights and soldiers knelt before him. The holy light enveloping Snowfort gradually dissipated, and David's radiance also gradually faded. The soldiers around them, having recovered, finally saw David's true form. Just as they were internally wondering who this man who had saved them, who had practically given them a second chance at life, they heard the man's self-introduction. I am Baron David Glamorgan, Lord of Winterfort, and I now officially assume control of all Snowfort affairs. David's gaze swept over everyone, lingering on no one. Yet, everyone present felt a sense of being noticed. From now on, you will serve as my soldiers and accept my command. I am willing to serve Lord Glamorgan. A deafening response echoed through the sky, echoing throughout Snowfort. Even the orc army stationed at a distance outside the city heard the powerful shout. The orcs couldn't understand human language, but they could sense the surge of fighting spirit in it. The orcs, who had originally believed that the upcoming battle would be stable, began to sense trouble. What the orcs at a distance from Snaufort could perceive, certainly could not be missed by Maddox Hawk, who was on the scene. As these soldiers' injuries were healed by that miraculous power, the morale of the Snaufort soldiers reached a peak, even exceeding that of the day when the reinforcements first arrived. It's not surprising to think that if he had been lying there, unable to move, waiting for death, and a powerful being healed his injuries, he would be extremely grateful to that person. If this powerful being remained his commander for a while, he would have the confidence to fight any enemy. Even though he hadn't experienced a near-death resurrection, he was now filled with hope for the future. With this miraculous power as his backing, he no longer considered the orcs outside the city such a formidable threat, even though over 5,000 orcs were currently gathered outside Snaufort. What's the situation in Iron Tree Keep and the Kingdom of Tiran? David, judging by the reactions of those around him, was certain that the soldiers from Iron Tree Keep would wholeheartedly support him and wouldn't disobey orders or cause trouble. He was curious about Iron Tree Keep's reaction to Snaufort's request for assistance. Iron Tree Keep's reinforcements won't be able to reach Snaufort anytime soon, Maddox Hawk said, looking at the young Baron of Glamorgan with even greater respect. I'm not sure how the Kingdom of Tiran will react, David nodded, indicating his understanding, and then headed for the city walls to observe the orc army outside. On the way, he inquired about the current situation in Snaufort, but this time, his inquiries weren't about military strength. He had known about Snaufort's military strength before arriving. With the recovery of the seriously injured, its strength, though somewhat reduced from its peak, remained formidable. He hadn't known much about the people's livelihood, however. Now, through Maddox's introduction, David had learned more about Snaufort. Besides the 1,000 auxiliary troops who had come with him, there were still over 700 left. Almost all the male civilians originally from Snaufort could serve as auxiliary troops, and this group still numbered around 400. Add to that the artisans and farmers who had recently fled from the villages and towns to the east, and those subsequently recruited from the villages and towns to the west, totaling about 500. There were no exact figures for women and children. After hearing the population report, David didn't ask any further questions. He didn't care for the buildings and facilities within Snaufort. Once the orcs were repelled, he would definitely have to Tiger completely renovate the fort. Stepping onto the city wall, David looked out at the orc camp in the distance, messy, simple, and crude. It wasn't a camp, but more like a large group of orcs found a random spot to sit down and rest in twos and threes. A few flickers of light could be seen among the crowd, likely bonfires lit by the orcs, but beyond that, not even a simple camp could be seen. After observing for a while, David asked Maddox directly if he had seen anything unusual during the battle with the orcs. Nothing unusual? It seems not. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 230 Arrange some more steel shock. Perhaps the humans at Snaufort weren't strong enough, or perhaps Maddox Hawk hadn't had the chance to meet them. Regardless, the acting commander offered David no useful clues. From Maddox's description, the orcs didn't appear particularly remarkable, merely strong, capable, and unable to communicate. David observed them for a moment, then pulled out an earbud-sized communicator and inserted it into his ear. RC, I'm here, directly east of Snaufort, locate all orc camps, understood. RC paused for 2 seconds before asking, don't attack yet. The Spartan heavy infantry and the inspector were still en route. David planned to seize the orcs unprepared, random gathering and launch a fierce attack. If possible, he'd repel the orcs in one fell swoop. Ideally, he'd also force the orcs to reveal their hidden strengths. He believed that this sudden surge of orcs, like the humans and dark elves of the past, was backed by a god or something similar. The continent of Brunia, David had originally thought this was just an ordinary magical world, full of elements he'd encountered in fantasy stories. Now, it seemed, Brunia held a deeper secret beyond its borders. What was the purpose of this reshuffling of races, replacing old ones with new ones? Descending from the city walls, David arrived directly inside Snaufort Castle's bunker, a prototype of a castle, situated next to the barracks. It wasn't very large, and some of its functions hadn't yet been completed, barely enough to qualify as a small bunker. The interior of this structure wasn't ideal, cold, damp, and poorly lit. Even in the height of summer, a fireplace was needed to keep the air dry and comfortable. But this was the best building in Snaufrest Castle, and David couldn't possibly live there with the ordinary soldiers and civilians. Besides, the conditions there were even worse. Even though Snaufrest Castle was still a prototype, its filthy and untidy environment was already evident. A suffocating odor often filled the corners. As David and Maddox toured Snaufort, the others who had come with him also took a tour of the fort. Accustomed to the clean and tidy environment of Wintertown, the conditions of Snaufort were a little unacceptable to everyone. Fortunately, the people traveling with him this time weren't pampered, and since it was a state of war, no one was dwelling on such trivial matters. Have the inspector and Gareth arrived? They've arrived. Entering the city, the Quinjet was incredibly fast, flying from Wintertown to Snaufort in the blink of an eye. The larger force in ground vehicles was much slower, but once David had ascertained the situation in Snaufort and reassured the residents, they arrived just in time. The orcs hadn't surrounded Snaufort, allowing the Wintertown troops to enter without delay. It was only then that Maddox realized that Wintertown's reinforcements were far more than just the two giant metal birds and the people he had seen. Even more troops were arriving. Watching the massive metal vehicle, pulled by barrelless beasts, speed across the land, carrying over 100 heavily armored and fully armed elite soldiers into Snaufort, not only Maddox rejoiced, even the civilians of Snaufort cheered. When the inspector, leading the charge, stopped in an open field and transformed into a massive metal giant, the cheers intensified. They knew nothing about transformers or Autobots. But the inspector's immense size gave them confidence. Furthermore, word had spread throughout Snaufort that the great Lord Glamorgan had used the miraculous power called Holy Light to heal all the seriously injured. Everyone realized that with the arrival of Lord Glamorgan, Lord of Winter, the crisis in Snaufort had been largely resolved. Now, with a powerful force capable of healing the wounded, commanding so many elite warriors, a massive metal giant, and the terrifying flying dragons long renowned on the northern plains, the day seemed imminent for a counterattack against the orcs and their complete expulsion. In fact, their judgment was spot on. With the arrival of the main force, David ordered a brief rest while he summoned his commanders to formulate a counterattack plan. Counterattack? Maddox was about to say something. He felt that even though Wintertown had sent over 100 heavily armored soldiers, along with a massive metal giant and metal dragon, even with the existing strength of Snaufort, they were still outnumbered. Even with all their auxiliary troops, they were still outnumbered by the opposing orcs, not to mention the 5,000 orcs themselves. It seemed even that wasn't even the full strength of the orcs. But he knew his words wouldn't be heard. As the commanders from Wintertown began entering the meeting room before the meeting began, Maddox noticed their incredibly relaxed demeanor, completely oblivious to the orcs in the distance. It was as if they saw 5,000 orcs as the same as 5, easily dealt with. Did they not understand the orcs' combat effectiveness? Did they not understand the terrifying power of 5,000 soldiers? Maddox didn't think so, especially after witnessing the immense power wielded by Baron David Glamorgan. There was only one explanation: these people knew the enemy's strength, yet they were still confident they could easily defeat them. As expected, as the meeting officially began, a quiet Maddox heard a report from the beautiful woman named Arcee that matched his own impressions. He was puzzled by who exactly was Arcee. From her description, it seemed as if she had witnessed the orcs firsthand, and her perspective seemed to be from the sky. Could she be conducting reconnaissance aboard one of those giant metal birds? So, besides the 5,000 orcs to the east, there are a few scattered orcs behind them. Yes, Arcee explained. These orcs behind them looked a bit different from the ones outside. They were no longer holding weapons, but various tools, seemingly constructing various structures. The orcs were likely planning to establish their own town on the eastern plains. To David, this wasn't a particularly concerning piece of information. But to those like Maddox, who didn't know the real story, the orcs had divisions of labor within their ranks and weren't simply a barbaric race focused on fighting and pillaging. This information was even more worrying than the sheer number of orcs. Ignore those orcs for now. Eliminate these 5,000 orc soldiers first, David gave his instructions. Now it was up to Gareth, the leader of the Winter Knights and the overall commander of the Winter Legion, to decide what to do. Has the battle plan been finalized? Sharon Rogers and Jack Krauser will lead the Winter Knights to airdrop to the rear of the Orc camp and conduct a surprise attack, cooperating with Darcy to create chaos. Gareth pointed to the Orc camp marked on the map. The Inspector and I will lead the Spartan infantry regiment to eliminate the Orcs from the front. Yes, that's a good plan. Maddox suddenly felt like flipping the table. What the hell is this, a battle plan? Isn't this just throwing everyone onto the battlefield to cause chaos? And the reinforcements sent by Wintertown this time are only a little over 100 in total, right? They have to split that small group into two, and then flank 5,000 Orcs from both sides? What kind of strategy is this? Even the squires of the Iron Tree Knights wouldn't dare to propose such a crude battle plan. Was this Gareth Stanton from the Tiran Knights? Is this how the Knights of Tiran fight? Are all their members monsters capable of defeating 1,000 with one? Even if the Knights of Tiran are monsters, how long has your Winter Knights been established? Could it be that the so-called Winter Knights are actually the Knights of Tiran? Just a different name to hide their true identity? Like Lemuel, Maddox made a similar guess. He couldn't understand why Gareth Stanton made such a tactical arrangement. It was simply because the current Spartan heavy infantry regiment and the Winter Knights simply couldn't work together, forcing them to be used separately. With him and the Inspector providing firepower protection for the Spartans, they could maintain a complete formation and advance step by step in coordination. As for the Winter Knights, he didn't worry about them at all. Even without Sharon Rogers and Jack Krauser leading them, he didn't believe those Orcs could threaten the Winter Knights, clad in blizzard power armor and armed with powerful grenades and missiles. I'll bring the Spellbreakers and Rangers to support the Spartan heavy infantry. Sylvanus came to help, not just to watch. After waiting for a while, Gareth hadn't even given her a position. Guessing that Gareth, the leader of the Winter Knights, wasn't available to command her, Sylvanus took the initiative and accepted a task. I'll ensure the Spartan infantry's left flank is not threatened. Sylvanus chose to protect the infantry's left flank for another reason. It blocked the Orcs' path to Frostwatch. As for the right flank, as long as the Orcs didn't reach the infantry's rear, it wouldn't be a problem. As for what if the Orcs reached North Plains Watch? That wasn't David's business. Then it's settled. Launch the attack at dawn tomorrow. David looked around. Everyone had a task, so he assigned himself a small task. I'll work with RC on the air strikes. Since gaining his fighter form, he hadn't really used it in combat. This time, he could bomb his way to his heart's content. Chapter 231, Adding Fertilizer to the Northern Plains. Knight Maddox Hawk, a native of Iron Tree Keep, received instruction in martial arts, tactical command, and other disciplines from a young age. Compared to many ordinary people, he had a head start. This gave Maddox an advantage as an adult, allowing him to become a knight at an early age and rise to become a senior commander within the Iron Tree Knights. Without this, he wouldn't have been assigned to Snowforest Keep, becoming its second in command and ultimately taking command after the previous commander's death. Maddox Hawk, despite his considerable abilities and experience, now watched in a daze as the Winter Knights made the preparations for their departure. There were so many things about the heavy armor he couldn't understand, like the object slung over his shoulders that looked like several pipes tied together, and the small box-like object. What were they for? And what about the weapons the Winter Knights carried? What kind of weapons were they? They looked like iron pipes attached to a piece of wood. Currently, the Winter Knights' primary weapon remains the Iron Forge-produced Garand. Tony's team has already begun work on a new rifle, though the specifications have yet to be determined, and design is expected to begin after the satellite project. Therefore, for the time being, the Garand will remain Wintertown's primary weapon. In fact, the Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment currently also uses the Garand. While the Spartans utilize traditional armor, their weaponry is unconventional. In addition to rifles and pistols, they also wield shields, spears, and other melee weapons. Currently, the Spartans excel at fighting in formations, relying on teamwork to compensate for individual weaknesses. As the Winter Knights board their Quinjet, 2 Quinjets will be airborne while David and RC launch their bombing raids. Peggy Carter will then pilot one and remote control the other, providing limited fire support mid-air. Ground strikes will primarily fall to David and RC. Wintertown's biggest military challenge remains a shortage of pilots. Land vehicle pilots can be trained quickly. By now, all members of the Winter Knights can drive, and even most of the Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment have developed considerable skills. Piloting aircraft is not so easy. Skilled pilots are still limited to a select few. Even Floyd and Gareth, 2 Winter Knights commanders who have become Paladins, are not very skilled pilots. In actual combat, they have to rely on Peggy, Sharon, and others to take the controls. Shouldn't we build a school? While the more ignorant the common people, the easier it is to rule them. Simply keeping them ignorant won't lead to continued advancement in civilization. David didn't want his territory to remain in a backward state forever. Just as David was debating whether to build Winter Elementary School first or both, a tomcat, RC, and 2 Quinjets took off. It was only then that Maddox, who had been watching nearby, realized that the woman named RC was actually the famous pink dragon of the northern plains. It wasn't the person riding the dragon, she was the pink dragon herself. RC's transformation was swift, but not so utterly incomprehensible. Maddox, while surprised, wondered what this woman was. Druid, it was said that druids could transform into various beasts, even magical beasts, but he wondered if this pink metal monster could be considered a magical beast. As for the giant black metal birds that Lord Glamorgan had conjured, they must have been some kind of magic, right? Watching the birds ascend, Maddox and several of his closest men stood on the city wall. Then, they watched the Spartan heavy infantry regiment march resolutely out of the Snow Fort gates. Sir, are we just going to sit here and watch the people of Wintertown go into decisive battle with the orcs? The man was about to say, we're going to die, but realizing that wasn't the right thing to say, he changed his tune. Baron Glamorgan has clearly stated that only the troops of Wintertown are required to participate in this battle. Our duty is to defend this town. Maddox Hawk wasn't sure how to explain this to his men. Because Lord David Glamorgan had healed all the wounded at Snow Fort, the soldiers there took a liking to the Lord of Winter. They were happy to join him against the orcs and defend Snow Fort. But just as everyone prepared for a more brutal battle, the Lord had already led his troops out of the city to engage the orcs in a decisive battle. The soldiers were astonished, and the knights, the commander, were in disbelief. They flocked to Maddox, and together they witnessed the Wintertown army's collective charge out of Snow Fort. Just as they were about to inquire more, a deafening roar echoed in the distance, and flames flickered in the orc camp. Piloting a tomcat, David watched the orcs scurrying about below, dropping bombs relentlessly. The tomcat was once used for ground attack missions, carrying 14 bombs, a formidable firepower that earned it the nickname Bombkit. David's tomcat was even more formidable, for it was essentially a transformer. After dropping its mounted bombs one after another, it simply flipped and transformed on its hardpoints, and a new bomb appeared beneath its belly, followed by another round of bombing. No aiming or diving was necessary. David simply sought the densest and most densely packed orcs, flew over, dropped his bombs, and then watched from high above as fireworks, mingled with limbs and severed arms, erupted. RC followed David nearby, the Vulcan cannon beneath the nose and the various missiles mounted on its wings creating more fireworks, dust, and fresh compost on the ground. The 2 transformers had contributed immeasurably to the fertility of the northern plains. Yet, they remained unfazed by complacency, toiling away diligently, hoping to further the prosperity of this land. As David and RC rampaged through the orc camp, 2 Quinjets passed through and arrived at the rear. Go. Kill every standing orc. Jack Krauser felt his blood boiling. He could finally demonstrate the fruits of his training. The feeling of mastering immense power filled him with an exhilarating feeling. Of all the people in Wintertown, he was the one most eager for this battle. When the cabin door opened, Krauser was the first to leap out. Using the thrusters on his back, he controlled his speed and direction in mid-air, kicking an orc to death as he landed. Krauser raised his left hand, and a mechanical composite bow, crafted from Stark technology and various exotic materials from Wintertown, appeared in his hand. As his right hand rested on the bowstring, an arrow appeared and was knocked to the bow. There was no need for careful aiming, all he saw were orcs. Krauser simply focused his arcane energy on the arrow, then released his hand from the bowstring to annihilate a large group of orcs. Boom! A burst of purple arcane energy not only killed the orc it struck, but also sent several surrounding orcs flying. And this was just the beginning. One after another, soldiers in power armor descended from the sky. Stray bullets, small missiles, and long tongues of flame from their Vulcan cannons continuously demonstrated their terrifying destructive power, transforming orc after orc into fertilizer, nourishing the land beneath their feet. Due to their distance, Maddox and his companions on the walls of Snowfrest Castle could not see what was happening behind the orc camp. However, as time passed, The Spartan heavy infantry and the orcs who had discovered the small group of human soldiers finally engaged in battle. The situation was completely different from what Maddox and his companions had expected. Initially, they thought the people of Wintertown were mad. Even if these soldiers were extremely powerful, how many could they kill against so many orcs? In the end, they would be overwhelmed and killed by countless orcs. However, the scene before them made Maddox question his worldview. He felt that he might not have understood the true combat power of this world. These heavy infantry from Wintertown did not wait quietly for the orcs. Instead, they used battle formations and coordinated tactics to engage the orcs. Instead, they spread out in a long line, raised their strange weapons, and launched an attack from a great distance. "What weapon is that?" he didn't expect anyone to answer, as there were few people from Winterfell around him. To his surprise, he actually heard the answer: Garand rifle, a firearm made by the dwarves of Ironforge, with technology provided by Baron Glamorgan. Dwarves? Ironforge? More questions popped up in Maddox's mind as he studied the person who answered him. Was it the female mage who had accompanied Baron Glamorgan to Snowforge? He remembered her name was Gina Proudmoore. Seeing that she had no intention of explaining himself further, Maddox continued to focus on the battle. At this time, the familiar pink dragon from the northern plains reappeared in everyone's sight. The pink monster, spitting long tongues of fire and stirring up a long trail of dust, reaped countless orc lives, practically severing a large group of orcs in two. Then, Maddox saw the giant black bird ridden by Baron Glamorgan soar through the sky, dropping a large amount of unknown objects. Then, the familiar sound of explosions followed. Maddox saw that more than half of the orcs within his sight had been eliminated. He realized that if Baron Glamorgan wanted to, even without soldiers, he and RC could kill them all. Chapter 232, People for People. In reality, even if David didn't take action, the orcs wouldn't be able to withstand his soldiers. The Winter Knights' equipment and combat methods were generations ahead of these orcs. Without their backers taking action, they wouldn't pose any threat to the Bronia continent. Unfortunately, David bombed several times with his Tomcat fighter, but saw no evidence of the orcs displaying any special abilities, which made him lose interest in dropping bombs. Leaving RC to patrol the air, specifically targeting the regrouped orc groups, David flew directly back to Snowfort. Under the watchful eyes of Maddox and several Snowfort knights, he leaped from his fighter into the air. The black Tomcat fighter suddenly shrank countless times before entering David's body. Then, the Baron of Glamorgan landed steadily atop the city wall, standing before Maddox Hawk. "My Lord Baron," Maddox was quick to react. Furthermore, he had witnessed so many miraculous things before: Baron David Glamorgan's holy light, RC's ability to transform into a pink dragon, and Baron Glamorgan's ability to unleash a giant black bird, that had already shattered his worldview, making him more receptive. Yes. After today, the orcs won't threaten Snowforest for a while. David turned and looked into the distance. The inspector was unleashing a barrage of destruction with his triple-barreled six-barreled Vulcan cannon, occasionally hurling giant grenades. The orcs couldn't pose any significant threat to the Spartan heavy infantry. On the flank, Sylvanus led her elven rangers and spellbreakers to clear out any orcs attempting to attack from the flank. The fighting style of this small group of high elves was one Maddox and his group were most familiar with. However, the fact that this small group of elves all possessed mysterious powers made Maddox and his group secretly marvel at the might of Winterfell. As the battle dragged on, the Spartan heavy infantry finally engaged the orcs in close combat, and Maddox and the others once again witnessed the sheer wealth and power of Wintertown. The heavy infantry's armor seemed to possess magical protection, so the orcs' weapons, when they struck them, caused no damage, save for a flash of light. The Spartan heavy infantry, in near-perfect safety, slaughtered any enemy who could get close. With no hope of victory in sight, the orcs' morale gradually crumbled, and orcs began to flee the battlefield. Seeing this, David knew the battle was over. The subsequent cleanup would take considerable time, and David wasn't about to waste it. Next, he would take over Snowfort and transform it into Wintertown's current frontier fortress. Most importantly, the people within Snowfort. David had come specifically to take over Snowfort, not just for a border fortress, but also for the people within. My ceremonial officer has already gone to the capital of Tiran, bearing a letter detailing the situation on the northern plains to His Majesty the King, arriving at the office original belonging to the commander of Snowfort, later used by Maddox, and now belonging to David, David confronted the former acting commander of Snow Fort. According to the current situation, barring any unforeseen circumstances, all military and civilian affairs of Snow Fort will be under my control. What are your opinions on this? Maddox Hawk glanced at his trusted confidant, Lemuel. He had anticipated this situation. As a lord, David Glamorgan would never spit out meat he had put in his mouth. However, one thing surprised him. According to the Lord of Winter, it seemed he would accept not only the original residents of Snow Fort but also the garrison and reinforcements sent by Iron Tree Castle. Was he, too, being assigned to the Lord of Winter's service? Lemuel, already worried about his lord's future, had been looking for an opportunity to suggest to Lord Hawk that if all else failed, they should surrender to the Lord of Winter. It's better than staying in Iron Tree Castle and being held responsible. Now that Lord Glamorgan has offered to recruit him, this opportunity must be seized. Maddox winked at Maddox Hawk, but by then, Maddox Hawk had already withdrawn his gaze, lowering his head in thought for a moment. Sir, from a legal perspective, there's no problem with Snowfield Castle being incorporated into your domain. However, the ownership of the army and civilians may not be so simple. Maddox didn't refuse, let alone protest. He had already made his position clear. David could hear that Maddox didn't object to Baron David Glamorgan taking over all of Snowfield Castle's resources. He simply said, there will be some non-legal issues that must be resolved first. The original residents of Snow Fort are easy to deal with. They came to the northern plains to reclaim new land, intending to settle here. Since you, my lord, have taken over Snow Fort, they naturally became your subjects. As for the artisans and farmers recruited from the surrounding areas, they are essentially indentured farmers of the nobles of Iron Tree Fort. They are bound by indentures and are not free citizens, unable to freely decide their own whereabouts. This is why many villagers returned directly to Iron Tree Fort after David destroyed Ironwater Village. However, given the current situation, these people can be considered property rescued by Lord Glamorgan. This means that it's not entirely unreasonable for Lord Glamorgan to detain them directly. If the nobles of Iron Tree Fort present the indentures to demand their release, David could demand a reasonable ransom, just as the Barnett family, the family behind Ironwater Village, later paid the ransom. If they don't, David can refuse to release them. The real problem lies with the army. David's direct recruitment of these people isn't impossible, but the hope is slim. These soldiers belonged to Lord Dudley Morgan, Lord of Iron Tree Keep. Many of them had wives, children, and parents back home. Family ties alone made it difficult for them to join Wintertown. What suggestions do you have? Let the soldiers choose. Maddox readily offered his proposal. Those willing to stay can be integrated into the Wintertown army. Those who can't leave their families behind can leave. However, you can also ask Lord Iron Tree Keep for a reasonable fee. The cost of an elite soldier was much higher than that of a peasant. Furthermore, weapons and equipment were also charged separately, unless Lord David Glamorgan was unwilling to return them. However, after witnessing the combat prowess of the Wintertown soldiers and their novel weaponry, Maddox doubted that Baron Glamorgan would be interested in such ordinary equipment. If this matter were left to you, how long would it take you? Maddox realized that this was Baron Glamorgan's formal invitation to him, but also a test of his sincerity and his abilities. It depends on how much you're willing to pay. If David's price was high, he might have to spend more time bargaining. If the price was right, the deal could be completed in half a month. I don't want money, I want people. David didn't need gold or silver, he needed more people to fill his territory. So his offer to Marcus Dudley Morgan was this: no matter how many farmers and artisans I currently have, you must send me an equal number of young men. As for soldiers, 1 soldier would be exchanged for 5 young men or 10 children. As a discount, Marcus Dudley Morgan would give them a discount on their weapons and equipment, half the price. If a family refused to pay and refused to hand over the contract to David, David was confident that Marcus Dudley Morgan would make them willingly complete the transaction. As the ruler of Iron Tree Keep, Marcus Dudley Morgan would certainly not refuse the deal, as he could not afford such a massive military loss. Even the Lord of Iron Tree Keep had to pay the ransom, and you, the nobles of Iron Tree Keep, still thought you were going to refuse? As for whether this population would lead to the rapid development of Wintertown, Iron Tree Keep probably had no time to worry about such matters at this point, and they should have realized that Wintertown's rise was unstoppable. After giving these instructions, David assigned the former Snow Fort commander to handle the matter. After Maddox and Lemuel left the office, David spoke into the dark corner. Keep a close eye on him and observe his behavior, but don't interfere with his actions. Understood? Vanessa's figure flashed in the corner. The increasingly skilled assassin left the office when Gareth came in to report. David and Edwin were the only two people who knew about Vanessa Van Cleef's presence in Snowfort. Originally, Vanessa's mission was to observe the Snowfort and gather information. However, she now had a more important mission, to assess whether Maddox Hawk truly wished to join Baron David Glamorgan. This observation would determine Maddox's future treatment in Wintertown. Having given these instructions, David decided not to stay in Snowfort any longer. The garrison, reconstruction, and other work here all needed to be arranged back in Wintertown. With the Orc army completely routed, the northern plains should be peaceful for a while. Besides, he also wanted to see how Tony's test robot was progressing. Unexpectedly, upon his return to Wintertown, he was greeted by a newcomer, a man wearing a large brown cloak that covered his entire body, his face barely visible. Chapter 233 Dark Wanderer. David frowned as he studied the figure before him. He sensed a strong aura of darkness from the man who completely obscured his features. This energy triggered a violent reaction within his holy light, as if his entire being, from the inside out, was sending out a warning. Who are you? This was David's first time encountering such a situation. Did this mean this newcomer was a villain? He silently used holy light to shield himself, ready to drive him away at any moment. Hello, I'm just a homeless person who's lost his way. May I ask where this place is? The robed figure spoke, a male voice tinged with confusion and a palpable sense of weakness. How far is it from here to Tristram? Tristram, David studied the man carefully. Due to their close proximity, and the fact that he no longer lowered his head to hide his features, David could see a face filled with determination, yet now appearing frail. Most importantly, David noticed a flash of light on the other man's forehead. To the uninitiated, it might have been the reflection of some kind of headdress, but once he guessed the man's identity, he knew exactly what it was. Soulstone. Dark Wanderer. Diablo. Judging from the man's reaction, the hero who had vanquished Diablo hadn't yet been completely eroded and corrupted by his power, still retaining some of his original consciousness. This is Wintertown. Wintertown. David briefly introduced Wintertown to the other man. When the other man heard that this was another world, he unconsciously raised his hand to touch his forehead, as if thinking of something, and muttered, "No wonder. Oh, I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself first. My name is Aedon." Aedon made no move to shake hands with a lord named David. He didn't want to interact with anyone at this moment. "If it's okay, I'd like to rest in your town for a few days. Of course, if you don't welcome me, I can leave immediately. Wintertown welcomes all non-hostile friends," David said, using the words he often used to welcome newcomers. Then he began to assess Aedon. The man who had defeated the Dreadlord Diablo, sealed him in the Soulstone, and then thrust the Soulstone into his own forehead, hoping to seal Diablo with his will, seemed to have not yet become a Dark Wanderer. "But there's one thing I want to confirm." "What is it? How long has that thing on your forehead been there?" Aedon gave a wry smile. His attire, his hooded head lowered as much as possible, was meant to hide it from view. "Honestly, I don't know. Maybe 2 or 3 days? Maybe longer." Ever since inserting the Soulstone into his forehead, he'd been completely lost in thought. He knew the risks were immense, but after defeating Diablo, he'd been absolutely confident in his own mental strength, convinced he could subdue the evil demon. It turned out he'd overestimated himself. Had he not stumbled upon this magical place, his days might have continued. Since arriving in Wintertown, he'd finally broken free from that trance. Even after just a short time, he felt much more alert, and the incessant mumbling in his trance had completely vanished. He wondered if it was because he'd arrived in another world. While he wasn't entirely sure if there was a true causal connection, Aedon felt that by remaining in this place, he could truly subdue Diablo, keeping the Dreadlord from hell sealed forever. However, he worried that this was just an illusion. If he accidentally released Diablo, this beautiful city might be destroyed by the Dreadlord. Therefore, Aedon only proposed a brief rest in Wintertown, hoping to recover physically and mentally before leaving and returning to his own world to continue fighting Diablo with his own willpower. However, his own experience had taught him that it was difficult to truly subdue the Dreadlord with his own willpower alone. Returning wouldn't necessarily lead to his desired outcome. What should he do? Stay, leaving the danger to a strange, otherworldly world, safe from the Dreadlord's threat? or return? Let the Dreadlord descend upon him once again? Aedan was torn between two options. His sense of justice prevented him from leaving the danger in this world, yet, his desire to protect his homeland prevented Diablo from threatening his world again. Just as he was unsure what to do, the young lord before him suddenly extended his hand and gestured, "Excuse me." Although he didn't understand what the other party was about to do, Aedan didn't refuse, signaling him to proceed as he pleased. He then watched David reach out and touch the soul stone on his forehead. Immediately, a golden, yet not glaring, light emanated from his hand, emitting a warm, comforting feeling. Aedan felt a warmth envelop his entire body, and his weakened body seemed to be slowly returning to its peak. What kind of power is this, holy light? Aedan felt it resemble the light power wielded by the Zakaram cult, yet with a certain difference. Just as he tried to sense it, David withdrew his hand, and the warm energy dissipated. "It seems that the stone on your forehead has fallen silent." David sensed an immense power from the soul stone on Aedan's forehead. It felt familiar yet strange. Familiar, in the sense that he felt he had seen it somewhere before. Strange, in the sense that he was certain he had never truly encountered such a powerful force. This awkward feeling gnawed at him, like the feeling of knowing you've forgot something, but unable to recall what it was, no matter how hard you tried. However, he was certain that Aedan was protected by this power while in Wintertown. Diablo within the Soulstone could no longer corrupt the human hero who had defeated and sealed the Dreadlord. He was completely safe in Wintertown. After sharing his discovery with Aedan, the Canderous prince's face showed a touch of joy, yet also a hint of worry. "I know my current situation poses a great threat to your territory. I know what you're trying to say, but I believe any trouble can be resolved." David looked at Aedan before him. Although he hadn't fully grasped the true nature of the mysterious power, he had a strange feeling. Diablo couldn't break through its blockade. This meant that Aedan could live in Wintertown for as long as he wished, and Diablo would never be able to corrupt him and resurrect him. Besides, I have someone here with a similar experience to yours. Perhaps you could learn something from him. Since his own Wintertown wouldn't be threatened, David naturally wouldn't drive Aedan away. He had great respect for heroes willing to sacrifice themselves to save the world. He didn't mind doing something good to save the world, as long as he could, and when he wasn't threatened. As long as Aedan stayed in Wintertown, Diablo wouldn't be resurrected again, Sanctuary would suffer less disaster, and countless lives would be saved because of David's words. David had always considered himself a good person. And this was just a small act of kindness. But this small act, while insignificant to David, was something completely different to Aedan. He was deeply grateful for David's taking him in, especially in his current state. "Thank you very much." Aedan thanked David again, then asked David what the name of the person he'd mentioned, who had a similar experience, was, and where he could find him. "His name is Medivh, and he usually lives in the hotel, that building over there." David met Aedan again in the square at the main entrance of Castle Glamorgan, where he could see the winter inn not far away. "You can stay there for the time being. Those from other worlds are accommodated in Jonah's winter inn until they decide to settle down. Those who wish to settle down in Wintertown can choose an existing house or find a location of their choice and build a personalized home. Normally, as Wintertown develops, newcomers who settle here won't receive the same preferential treatment as those who first arrived. However, the situation for visitors from other worlds is unique, and David hasn't yet decided how to adjust it. He'll stick to his usual routine. With a Goldfinger backing him up, David won't lose out. When David offered Aedan permission to settle in Wintertown, the hero from the world of Diablo had already paid his remuneration. However, David first took Aedan to meet Jonah and arranged accommodations for him. He then took him to meet Medivh, who helped teach Aedan the common tongue of Brunnian. Only after all these arrangements were completed did he finally have time to examine the reward he had received from Aedan. What is this? This time, the reward wasn't some kind of physical enhancement or mental boost. It appeared to be a physical object, handed directly to David. But looking at the energy-like vortex in his hand, David wasn't sure if it was actually a physical object. Chapter 234 Dungeon. Could the reward this time be a ball of energy? David looked at the object in his hand and tried to make contact. However, the holy light contacted the vortex, but nothing happened. No fusion, no repulsion. It was as if there was nothing in his hand, as if the ball of energy was just an illusion. Although he didn't understand the exact reason, David was certain that this object in his hand wasn't some kind of energy he could absorb. Is it like a crystal seed? Needs to be planted somewhere. After returning to Castle Glamorgan from the Winter Hotel, David wandered around and decided to try it out in his back garden. He quickly discovered the correct way to use this object: find a wall and throw it at it. As the object in his hand hit the wall, David suddenly understood what it was. Isn't this the dungeon entrance? He had seen this familiar scene countless times. But this time, as the energy swirled, the flat wall gradually transformed into a massive double door. Watching the dungeon entrance transform into the one in the Diablo loading screen, David wondered if the reward this time was a trip to the Diablo world. What kind of reward was this? With his mind full of questions, David didn't rush in rashly. After studying for a moment, he figured out how to remove the gate from the wall. Then, using the communication devices he'd gradually distributed, David contacted the few people currently in Winter Town. He then quietly waited in the basement, which served as a training ground. This underground training ground was located 2 levels below the garage. It also housed a shooting range, allowing David to practice with firearms and archery. This location was chosen because it served as a backup training ground, rarely used, making it a perfect place to store his reward. After installing the equipment, David watched the air mass slowly transform into the familiar double doors. He quietly waited for his companions to arrive. He didn't wait long. Soon, everyone, including Tony Stark, arrived one after another. Fortunately, the space was spacious enough for everyone to move around, otherwise David would have regretted calling so many people over. "What is this? I don't know," David answered Tony flatly, allowing Tony to wander around the gate and study it. "Newcomer? Who's here this time?" Mark asked directly, hoping to infer the object's function from its identity. "On. Who's that?" Admittedly, while the Diablo series is quite famous, few people know the game's setting and characters. David wouldn't have known this information if he hadn't read some online articles in his previous life, indirectly learning about the Diablo setting. Sure enough, as soon as David described the world, Mark immediately remembered the game. "No wonder this gate looks so familiar, David." "What?" Hearing Tony's call, David turned and saw Tony pointing at the top of the gate, where words gradually appeared. "Dungeon, Sanctuary." David read the words aloud. Everyone, including Tony, Mark, Laura, Eva, and Helen, began to speculate about the object's purpose. Some speculated it was a stable connection to another world, but the prefix dungeon made Mark think there might be more to it. There's no point in guessing. The best way to determine its true function is to actually use it. Tony summoned his suit and prepared to don it to take a look inside. "Let's go in together." David checked his gear. Aside from the Lightbringer suit, all his weapons were in his storage. Laura couldn't be absent from such an adventure. While David was checking his gear, Laura had already unearthed her bow. Although she didn't say anything directly, everyone understood her intention. "Let's go." The iron suit flew over, and Tony instantly transformed into Iron Man. He waved to David and, without waiting for a response, opened the door before him. He ignored the fact that the door only emitted a ball of light, making it impossible to see what was behind, and walked right in. David had intended to cast a holy light shield on Tony, but before he could do anything, Tony vanished in the light. After exchanging a glance with Laura and helplessly throwing up their hands, David and Laura both released holy light shields and walked into the light together. Their vision was flooded with white light, and after a few seconds, they recovered. David glanced around, only to find the surrounding light was extremely dim. He looked up at the sky, where thick, dark clouds obscured most of the light. "Is this Camp Rogue?" Mark's voice came from behind him. David noticed Mark had followed him. Behind them stood an orange-red, oval portal. It was obvious they had arrived through this portal. Glancing around, this seemed to be Camp Rogue, the opening location in Diablo II. David noticed that the people in the camp ignored their arrival and the orange-red portal nearby, remaining where they were, their expressions unchanging. While everyone was still observing their surroundings, Tony approached the tall man closest to the group, attempting to engage him in conversation. "Hello, stranger. I'm not surprised to see someone from your clan. With all the trouble these days, many adventurers have traveled here from far and wide." The other person rambled on and on. Even Tony's attempts to interrupt him were futile. The tall man continued to chatter on until he finished. "You should also talk to Akira. She seems to be the leader of this camp. Perhaps she can tell you something else." He paused. Thankfully, the other person spoke in the common language of Brunia, which everyone could understand. But when Tony greeted him again, he only received mechanical, repetitive, and emotionless responses like, "Hello, nice to meet you, what can I do for you?" Seeing this, everyone understood what was going on. NPC, is this actually a game? Mark glanced around in surprise, then pinched his arm. The sharp pain made him wonder if he'd guessed wrong. Are we truly inside a game? Or are we just entering through a consciousness? David remained silent. He now understood what a dungeon meant. In large-scale online games like World of Warcraft, those so-called instances are actually called dungeons. Following this line of thought, the reward he received this time was actually a replica, and the content of the replica was Diablo II. David shared his theory, and everyone agreed with it. So the question is, what's the purpose of this replica? Are we entering in person? Or just our consciousnesses? I'm certain we're entering in person. David, while making his own speculation, secretly used the holy light to check his condition. He could say with certainty, they had all entered the replica in person. The holy light and Cybertronian bodies are all functioning properly, and all the equipment has been brought in. That's good news. Although I don't know if the weapons I carry will be effective against those so-called demons from hell. Tony also checked his equipment. The good news was that his Iron Man suit and its weapons and ammunition were all functioning properly, and he could even contact Jarvis here. The bad news was that in a place like this, he probably wouldn't be able to replenish his expended ammunition on the spot, and his combat effectiveness seemed greatly limited. What should we do next? Find Akira. Laura remained silent, observing quietly from the side, quickly taking in the general situation of the camp. The camp wasn't large, and their current location in the center afforded them a good overview. Aside from a few NPCs stationed at their respective posts, the most common figures in the camp were the rogues wielding bows and arrows. Before we look for Akira, perhaps we should first determine the strength of the monsters in this dungeon, David pondered. Since he knew this was a dungeon-like place, the first thing to determine was how strong the monsters were. Could he defeat them? If he could naturally consider more. If not, there was no point in overthinking. You're right, Tony agreed, then soared into the air. After slightly adjusting his direction in mid-air, he quickly locked onto target. He didn't rush in rashly, but instead fired a missile from a sufficient distance. The missile, launched from his arm, accurately struck the pale, stiff-limbed zombie, and with a loud explosion and flash of fire, it was reduced to shattered pieces. Tony vaguely sensed something and flew back to the rogue camp, landing in front of David. The monsters outside aren't very strong, but after I killed that monster, I had a strange feeling. Before Tony could finish his words, David released holy light to heal Tony. Even after a large amount of holy light was cast over him, Tony felt that the strange feeling had not disappeared. After a careful examination, coupled with Jarvis' detailed testing of Tony through the suit's built-in devices, he concluded that a small amount of pure energy existed within Tony's body, and as this energy gradually weakened, Tony's body seemed to be improving slightly. Okay, I now know the purpose of this dungeon. Chapter 235, Rushing Dungeons is a shortcut to becoming stronger. Dungeon, Sanctuary, as the name suggests, is a world set in the world of Diablo, resembling a dungeon. David and his companions didn't seek out Akira, but instead left the rogue camp. They could enter and exit the camp freely, and the rogues at the gate ignored David and his group unless they approached them. Even when Mark deliberately made faces in front of the rogues, they remained calm and serious, staring straight ahead without reacting. Clearly, these are just a bunch of emotionless NPCs. Mark spread his hands, feeling sorry. It seemed the NPCs in this world were incredibly low in intelligence, completely devoid of any interactivity. David ignored Mark and, after leaving the camp, simply wandered around. He spotted a pale, stiff-limbed zombie wandering across the empty field. He pulled out his light hunter and fired. Long practice, coupled with improved physical fitness and control over his body, had significantly improved his shooting skills, not to mention the firearms talent he'd gained from Peggy. The shot, seemingly fired casually, struck the zombie with pinpoint accuracy. The powerful bullet, infused with crystal ore powder and the holy light energy possessed by the holy light hunter, which suppressed undead creatures, made the shot incredibly powerful. The zombie was instantly shattered into countless pieces, impossible to piece back together. The moment the zombie was slain, David clearly felt a surge of pure energy entering his body, which was quickly absorbed, leaving no trace of its presence. He felt no noticeable changes, Perhaps because his physique was already exceptionally strong and unaffected by such a scarce energy source. However, the situation was different for others, such as Eva, who had recently gained holy light recognition, or Gwen and Helen, who were still considered ordinary people. Tony soared for a while longer, slaying several monsters in a row before returning to the group. I can clearly feel my body getting better. The data displayed on his armor provided more direct information. His cell vitality, muscle mass, and other stats had all shown positive improvements. Tony Stark, already aging and experiencing a noticeable decline in his health, felt as if he had returned to his prime in his 30s. Sir, I apologize for interrupting you. Your current level of fitness is only comparable to your healthiest period in recent years. Jarvis, you don't need to use a loudspeaker to tell me this. Yes, sir. David, looking at Tony, clad in his armor with only his head visible, inquired about the other situation. Laura and Mark had also found a few zombies and, after decisively dispatching them, returned. They reported feeling a surge of energy flowing into their bodies, but the change in their physical fitness was less noticeable. Mark's feeling was stronger than Laura's, as he had mastered the elemental powers later than Laura, and his physical fitness hadn't improved as much as Laura's. Does this power-up only work in this world? Or does it also work outside? Several people didn't rush to revel in the joy of leveling up. They had many questions they needed to answer, like the one Tony was raising. Perhaps we should leave here first and see what's going on. Okay, let's go out first. They turned back to the rogue camp and entered the orange portal one after another. Then, with a flash of light, they were back in the training room on the second underground floor. How is it? David's own physical changes were too subtle to accurately assess, so he could only ask Tony. Tony scanned his armor and obtained detailed data. The power-up gained in here hasn't disappeared. Upon hearing this, everyone immediately understood the significance of this dungeon. This is a powerful item that can rapidly increase our strength. Mark glanced at the closed dungeon door next to him, examining it curiously. Although he had successfully sensed the elemental spirits and become a true shaman, his own strength was not increasing rapidly. Who on the path to transcendence wouldn't want to constantly grow stronger? Mark wondered what amazing things he could achieve once he became stronger. Now, a method for rapidly growing stronger lay before him. Damn it. I'm going to be on a spaceship in a few days. The thought of this filled Mark with gloom. He'd have to drift in space for a long time before he could truly use this dungeon to improve his strength. Considering the various medical examinations he might have to undergo, not only would he not be able to use the dungeon to improve his strength, he'd even have to find ways to weaken himself. Every thought of this filled him with a wave of sorrow. Extremely depressed, Mark decided to turn a blind eye and return home to weaken himself before making final preparations for returning to Earth. Meanwhile, Tony, David, and Laura continued to study the dungeon. After a full day of joint research, they finally had a relatively detailed understanding of it. First, the world within the dungeon resembled a game version of Diablo II. David also discovered that the handle on the gate was actually a dial. Turning it changed the text above the gate, revealing Dungeon, Sanctuary, Dungeon, Nightmare Sanctuary, and Dungeon, Hell Sanctuary. These clearly corresponded to the 3 different difficulty levels in the game Diablo II. Choosing both Nightmare Sanctuary and Hell Sanctuary simultaneously prevented the gate from opening, suggesting it hadn't been unlocked yet. David speculated that he might need to complete the normal difficulty first. With this, the two of them confirmed one thing: this dungeon was a real-life Diablo world. The gate's direction changes each time you enter, just like in the game. The dungeon map has a certain degree of randomness. Upon re-entry, previously killed monsters will respawn, but completed quests won't. Quests are bound to the person who accepts them. Tony and David entered together. After David accepted the quest to clean up the cave, Tony could re-accept it upon entering alone. Even 2 people could enter separate dungeon planes, meaning they were both in the dungeon, but on separate servers, unable to see each other. Quest rewards were no longer skill points, but rather relatively large amounts of power-up energy. After completing 2 missions to clear the evil cavern, Tony's physical fitness had significantly improved, now returning to the state of his prime. David and Laura, on the other hand, hadn't noticed any significant changes. Right now, the demons on normal difficulty aren't very strong. Ordinary soldiers with training and weapons can easily defeat them, even though the evil caverns were teeming with monsters, and ordinary soldiers could easily get caught up in the mauling. They could still kill scattered demons around Rogue's camp to improve their own strength before embarking on those quests. Akira, like in the game, can help us recover while we're talking to them. After various tests, David and Tony agreed that the dungeon was the best tool for rapidly improving their strength. It could be said that with hard work, the people of Wintertown could quickly become extremely powerful through this dungeon. However, after further testing, Tony and David discovered a limitation. The dungeon could only accommodate 5 people. Whether each person entered a dungeon individually or all 5 entered the same dungeon, only 5 people could be in the dungeon at most. Even so, this item was still a very powerful item. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking about a lot of questions. For example, if Aidon could offer such powerful rewards, how terrifying is the real sanctuary world he lives in? And where does the energy in this dungeon come from? The more he studied, the more questions Tony had, and David was also pondering them. We can let Aidon answer the first question. As for the second question, David had a vague guess, but he wasn't sure how correct it was. If his guess was correct, then not only would the various questions about the dungeon's rewards be answered, but also some other rewards. Let me know when you have a definitive answer. Tony wasn't going to continue struggling with this dungeon. He wanted to go back and finish his work. Then, when he had enough free time, he would return to the dungeon and grind hard, trying to improve his physical fitness to surpass Thor's. David found Aidon, who had rested well in the hotel, learning a new language with Medivh and visiting Winterfell. He then led the hero from Sanctuary into the dungeon. They didn't linger long. After killing a few fallen, Aidon came to the conclusion that the monsters here were heartbreakingly weak. He felt no threat from them at all, and that the monsters were a disgrace to the very name of demon. This assessment wasn't surprising. David knew that the sanctuary world was populated by high-ranking angels and hellish demons, and that the overall power of that world was immense. David was concerned that Aidon seemed to gain more energy than others by slaying monsters in the dungeon. Furthermore, the soul stone on his forehead had undergone a subtle change. Such subtle changes would have been unnoticed if David hadn't observed them closely. Chapter 236, Disguiser Number 1. While David and Aidon were exploring the dungeon, Elias Parker, who had been sent by David to the Tiran capital, also delivered a letter from Winter City. He also went to complete his resignation. From then on, he was no longer Tiran's ceremonial officer, but instead served solely as a ceremonial officer for the Winter Lord, Baron David Glamorgan. After delivering the letter, Elias Parker had little else to do but remain in the capital awaiting the king's response. He had a feeling he might need to remain there for quite some time, as King Abelson Tiran would likely struggle to make a quick decision. Indeed, this was indeed the case. When the letter from Winter City reached Abelson, the king was somewhat bewildered. An orc attack on the northern plains? He had known about this news a while ago. The Tiran capital was currently debating how many troops to send to the northern plains. Just as his men were assessing the orcs' fighting capacity, figuring out how many troops to mobilize and how much supplies and fodder to gather, and considering the intelligence suggesting a large orcish population, even the true number still unknown, whether it was necessary to deploy the kingdom's newest equipment, before any conclusions could be reached, a letter from Wintertown arrived, informing him that the northern orc threat had been contained by Baron Glamorgan of Wintertown. The orcs' latest attack had been repelled by Baron Glamorgan, who had taken control of Snaufort, forcing the orcs back to the eastern part of the northern plains. Ironfort was also freed from the threat. So, Baron David Glamorgan has taken control of the entire western part of the northern plains. Wintertown had expanded its influence to encompass Frostfort and Snaufort, completely devolving into Baron Glamorgan's domain. The nobles of Ironfort, who had hoped to gain new territory, had instead lost everything to Baron Glamorgan. Tisk, Abelson sighed, remembering the young man he had met at this time last year. At the time, he had hoped David could teach those dishonest Iron Tree nobles a lesson, but he hadn't expected to see results so quickly. The young man had done well. But too well. Besides reporting on the situation in the northern plains, this letter also addressed a request for a reward from His Majesty. Wintertown's influence had expanded many times over, its territory already exceeding its original size. While the population was still small, it was no longer suitable to be called Wintertown. Furthermore, Baron Glamorgan had successfully repelled the invading aliens and defended the territory of the Kingdom of Tiran, undoubtedly fulfilling his role as a border defender. These achievements, combined with the actual increase in territory, warranted a promotion and reward. But, was it too soon? Abelson immediately set the question aside. The most important thing now was the emergence of the troublesome orcs to the north. The kingdom itself was also experiencing unrest and undercurrents. And what about the surrounding nations? They were merely maintaining a superficial peace. If anything were to show signs of trouble in the Kingdom of Tiran, those enemies would pounce like hungry wolves and devour the kingdom. In this situation, if David could develop Wintertown and stabilize the northern part of the kingdom, it would undoubtedly be a boon for Abelson. With this in mind, Abelson had already made a decision: Wintertown would be elevated to Winter City. And Lord David Glamorgan would be elevated to Earl, with his domain encompassing the entire northern plains. This information would be announced and disseminated nationwide tomorrow morning, and all relevant substantive measures would be expedited. Given the ongoing state of war in the northern plains, Earl Glamorgan wouldn't need to come to the capital to receive the title. As for the final suggestion in the letter, Abelson pondered it carefully and decided to discuss it with his trusted ministers tomorrow to determine if forced relocation was feasible. After putting the letter away, Abelson began to ponder further, deeply curious about how that young man, David, had built Wintertown into such a powerful force in just over a year. He realized that the young man might not be so simple. He must have the support of some powerful force behind him. He wondered if David, a rapidly rising noble, would become a future aid to him and the Kingdom of Tiran, or a new threat. At the same time, a choice he had previously set aside flashed through his mind. It seemed time to choose a distinguished fiancée for Sophia. While Abelson was pondering how to deal with David, Iron Tree Keep was also discussing a similar topic. While Abelson still needed to discuss it with the ministers, Iron Tree Keep made a quick decision. They fully accepted Baron David Glamorgan's proposal and agreed to incorporate Snowford and Frosttown into Wintertown's sphere of influence. The farmers and artisans who had once belonged to the northern plains were also to be incorporated into Wintertown's sphere of influence. However, regarding the military, Marcus Dudley Morgan demanded a complete withdrawal to Iron Tree Keep. He would exchange these soldiers for the young and middle-aged population or healthy children David requested, at the price Baron David Glamorgan had set. Of course, if any soldiers were unwilling to return to Iron Tree and strongly desired to remain in Wintertown, Lord Dudley Morgan would not force them to return. Whether their military status would be transferred directly to Wintertown, or whether they would be discharged and reinstated in Wintertown's ranks, would be a matter of later discussion. Maddox Hawk, having finalized all the details, immediately set out for Wintertown. Vanessa, who was in charge of observing the entire process, summoned the Quinjet as Maddox departed. Taking advantage of the darkness and the aircraft's stealth capabilities, she quietly departed Iron Tree. She returned to Wintertown several days ahead of Maddox and reported the situation in detail to David. Confirming Maddox Hawk's sincerity in joining Wintertown, David, after completing the transaction for Wintertown at Iron Tree, knew he had a new knight at his disposal. Elias has reported that Wintertown's upgrade to Winter City should be finalized in the next few days. David was in high spirits after receiving the continuous good news. Ratchet had finally mastered the light, and Optimus Prime had reached a verbal agreement with the Decepticons. The countdown to the Decepticons joining Wintertown had officially begun. Optimus Prime's biggest challenge now was how to steal Megatron's body without harming his human comrades. This wasn't a difficult problem. David could simply make a quick trip and retrieve Megatron's body without alerting any guards. Hermit warriors were highly skilled in stealth. Furthermore, David only needed to infiltrate the interior. He didn't need to worry about escaping with Megatron's body. Once he had access to Megatron's corpse, he could simply return to Wintertown with it. Before I go to your place, let's take a look at Tony's work. Tony Stark had spent considerable time, several days, finally creating a suit capable of reaching geosynchronous orbit. Simply building a suit capable of reaching geosynchronous orbit wouldn't be difficult for Tony. What really took time was adding numerous additional features. This was especially true for the outer camouflage. To prevent Wintertown from being contacted in the event of a problem, the suit was crafted in the style of the Evernight Empire. Finally, a dark elf corpse, a sailor killed on a warship, was placed inside, simulating various physiological signals. The suit also appeared to be powered by dark energy. To make this dark energy technology convincing, Tony disassembled a dark elf assault ship. With physical cloaking, entire reconnaissance, and surface camouflage all in place, everyone gathered in the conference room at Castle Glamorgan, watching the holographic image displayed on the tabletop. This image, constructed using the various detection devices installed on the suit, displayed everything within the suit's detection range. Pretender 1, activate. Seeing everyone present, Tony wasted no time explaining the various features of Pretender 1. Jarvis immediately ordered the Pretender 1 to activate its armor and rapidly fly westward along the Winter River. Using Pretender 1's detection system, the group also learned about the situation west of the Winter River. As the Pretender 1 gradually gained altitude, David noticed that it was quickly approaching the sea outlet and glimpsing a vast expanse of water. "It's the sea." James Norrington was thrilled. It was the real ocean he longed for. However, before leading the fleet out to sea, he still had much work to do. Furthermore, Pretender 1's true mission wasn't to find a sea outlet. After sighting the sea, Pretender 1 gradually adjusted its flight direction diagonally upward. This angle would allow Pretender 1 to fly farther, getting as close as possible to the Eternal Night Empire's sphere of influence. Especially after reaching synchronous orbit, it would also be able to detect the western part of the continent where the Eternal Night Empire resided. However, just as Pretender 1 was about to reach synchronous orbit, a golden beam of light suddenly appeared and struck Pretender 1, instantly shattering it into dust. The scene cut off. The conference room fell silent for 2 seconds. Tony had immediately severed all contact with Pretender 1 to prevent anyone from tracking him. "That golden light, if I'm not mistaken, it came from above." Laura's words were quickly confirmed. Tony paused the footage of Pretender 1's destruction and replayed it frame by frame. Everyone could clearly see that the golden light was coming from higher. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 237 The New Megatron. The destruction of Pretender I meant the satellite launch plan was aborted. In his laboratory, Tony Stark meticulously analyzed all the information transmitted by Pretender I, including all the imagery and various data collected before it was destroyed by the golden light. Combining this data and imagery, Tony was able to derive a more accurate picture, giving David a more detailed understanding of the object that destroyed Pretender I. "Is it a weapon from the Evernight Empire? I don't know." Enid said she had no idea the Evernight Empire had launched such a device or weapon. Laura specifically tried to inquire with Enid, but the Dark Elf denied she was unaware of the Evernight Empire's technology. Of course, Enid's word should be taken with a grain of salt, as previous events have proven that the Dark Elf upper elves conceal many secrets from the ordinary Dark Elves below. Therefore, the secret launch of advanced satellites and weapons isn't surprising. Where's Cecil? Cecil has already departed for the Lost Lands, the wild land west of the Holy Kingdom of Gaunt. Cecil had just set out. He planned to explore the Lost Lands, hoping to find his compatriots who had left the Evernight Empire years earlier and inquire about any knowledge that had prompted their departure. Besides wanting to learn more about the truth, Cecil also deliberately visited the Lost Lands to alert the Evernight Empire of his whereabouts, making it appear that Cecil and his siblings had fled to the Lost Lands and thus reducing their attention on Wintertown. This would be beneficial for Cecil and his sister, Enid, as the Evernight Empire would not relentlessly pursue Dark Elves who fled to the Lost Lands. This was likely due to the large number of Dark Elves there, the harsh environment, and the complex terrain, particularly the numerous maze-like caves and tunnels, making it extremely difficult to track down specific targets. It was for these reasons that the Lost Lands became a prime refuge for Dark Elves after leaving the Evernight Empire. However, Cecil and Enid didn't want to join their compatriots in settling in the Lost Lands. They saw Wintertown as a better option. Accustomed to comfortable life, they seriously doubted they could endure the harsh conditions of the Lost Lands. Furthermore, Baron David Glamorgan, Lord of Wintertown, didn't seem to object to the Dark Elves settling in Wintertown permanently. So be it, the satellite project was aborted, but the Decepticon capture plan continued as normal. Seeing no urgent matters around him, David took some time off and traveled by ambulance to the Transformers universe. With the help of Optimus Prime, he located Megatron's body. Finally, using the special abilities of the Hermit Warrior and some assistance from the Decepticons, David successfully infiltrated the secret facility and retrieved Megatron's body back to Wintertown. The entire process was uneventful, so smooth that David himself was tempted to grumble. This process, even if it were made into a movie, no one would watch it. Regardless, Megatron's body had been retrieved. Next, David could wait for Fordring's arrival before traveling to Azeroth to resurrect Megatron. Come to think of it, the reconstruction of Lordaeron isn't going smoothly. Fordring would regularly visit Winterstown to ensure proper communication and exchange intelligence. Occasionally, he would bring back or send back people from Azeroth, like China, Sylvanas, and Raynor. So, even though David hadn't been there in a while, he still had a good understanding of the situation in Lordaeron. The harm of the Scourge wasn't simply turning the living into the undead. Wherever the undead plague passed, it contaminated and turned it into a deadly wasteland. These places, heavily contaminated by the forces of death, also affected the creatures that inhabited them, corrupting them into undead creatures. This pollution is difficult to eliminate. In Azeroth's original history, the Eastworld, ravaged by the Scourge, was once Lordaeron's most fertile region. Besides the capital of Lordaeron, it also housed major cities like Strathalman and Dorel. The Eastworld boasted countless farmlands and was the kingdom's primary source of food. However, after several years of the undead Scourge, the entire Eastworld region became a deadly wasteland, later renamed the Plaguelands, shattering its former prosperity and beauty. Now, thanks to David's meddling, Fordring, having gained advanced knowledge of the plot and orchestrating a series of arrangements, has only managed to mitigate the pollution. A vast swath of death still lingers throughout Lordaeron. To eliminate this death force, not only are the Paladins of the Silver Hand and priests of the Church of the Holy Light busy, but Lordaeron has also sought assistance from Dalaran and managed to establish connections with druids. Even so, this only manages to control the pollution. Completely eradicating the death force from Lordaeron would likely take years. Under these circumstances, even the restoration of Lordaeron's royal city and the succession ceremony for the new queen have been postponed. The succession ceremony will take place no later than next autumn, Fordring said, referring to the timeframe for Wintertown. Upon his return, he explicitly stated that he would loan the digger to Lordaeron once David completed the renovation of Snow Forest. Of course, Wintertown couldn't provide such a massive undertaking as restoring Lordaeron's royal city for free. The Kingdom of Lordaeron would pay a fee, and Quel'Therlas, Dalaran, and Stormwind, allies of Lordaeron or those with special ties, would also contribute to the payment. These payments didn't necessarily require only gold, silver, or jewelry. Various metals, minerals, cloth, silk, and other materials could be paid to Wintertown at market prices. Speaking of which, Wintertown is going to become Wintercity. According to the news Elias sent back, the upgrade to Wintercity is confirmed. King Abelson and his ministers are currently discussing other matters. Once confirmed, they will send the news and the appointment documents to Wintertown. With the development of Wintertown, especially with the emergence of more and more new things, David no longer had to hide everything. For example, communication devices were often provided to important people, ensuring they could be reached at any time. Although Elias returned to Tiran Royal City alone, he actually maintained constant contact with Wintertown. In an emergency, he could use the communicator to request assistance, and Wintertown could quickly reach Elias Parker. Therefore, when the Tiran royal capital confirmed that David's Wintertown would be upgraded to Wintercity, David was immediately informed, even though he was in the most remote border town of Tiran Kingdom. Is your title going to change too? Yes, Earl, not Marcus. But one rank lower than Dudley Morgan, Lord of Iron Tree Keep. Perhaps they felt David was too young, and had only recently ascended to the nobility. If you were promoted directly to Marcus, as the war between Winterfell and the Orcs continued, David's contributions would accumulate. What would be done when the time came to reward him? Would he simply make David the Duke of Winter? No king would want to see a duke wielding real power and commanding an army, let alone one he had personally created. I don't think you'll be able to keep this earldom for much longer. Fordring looked at David. After spending so much time together, David's inner thoughts were obvious to those around him. He wasn't very good at hiding them. Fortunately, he was hiding in the remote borderlands. If he had been in the capital, Abelson would have noticed his rebellious intentions long ago, and David would have likely turned traitor long before then. How could he, under the guise of a noble lord of the Kingdom of Tiran, brazenly propose to His Majesty the King that the idle young and middle-aged population of Tiran be forcibly relocated to the northern plains? This earldom should last for a while, right? David felt that he would manage the population migration and the development of the entire northern plains well for a few years, using his earldom title as a pretext. Only after the entire north was developed into a prosperous and advanced region would it be the right time to take further steps. Apart from anything else, The Winter Knights must be fully established before considering conquests. What kind of knights is this with only 50 men now, including 20 new recruits? Even if those 50 men were all elite enough to serve as officers, they still needed to be supplemented with the soldiers they would lead, right? Adding the Spartan heavy infantry, there were only a little over 300 men. What could they do with so few? The Spartan II could be put on the agenda. After today, Wintertown, or rather, Winter City, would gain a new force, the Decepticons who would soon be joining Wintertown. David hadn't decided whether to form a separate Decepticon unit or mix it with the Winter Knights and Spartan heavy infantry. Considering the Decepticons were all military vehicles, a mixed group seemed the best option. Resurrection. My warrior, borrowing immense energy from a sleepy head, David easily rekindled Megatron's spark, while also imprinting a core command of loyalty during his programming. Fight for you, my leader. The resurrected Megatron returned to his classic appearance, retaining his original tenacity and wisdom. The only difference was that this newly resurrected, or reborn, Megatron firmly believed that following David was the true future for all Cybertronians. P.S. When giving new Transformers souls and personalities in Transformers G1, some core commands could be preset. Before starting this book, I carefully reviewed both G1 and the movies. Don't accuse me of making this up. Chapter 238 When Dreams Come True. Besides believing David to be the true leader of Cybertron, because David possessed a Cybertronian body, Megatron didn't find it strange to consider a human his savior. Megatron remained largely the same. After a few words with Megatron, David gained a preliminary understanding of his new subordinate. The next question was where these Cybertronians should live. When Wintertown was founded, the city's buildings were spacious enough to accommodate the Transformers' size, ensuring that Cybertronians of normal size could move freely within Wintertown. The main roads were incredibly wide, so wide that even the residents of Wintertown wondered if the Lord had lost his mind, building them so large and wide. Even several Cybertronians walking side by side wouldn't feel crowded. However, David hadn't given much thought to the housing issue. At the time, the main Cybertronians living in Wintertown were RC and Ratchet. The ones who arrived later were mostly Autobots, who could simply rest in the garage at Castle Glamorgan. If the garage felt stuffy, they could, like Skyfire, find a comfortable spot and park in their vehicle form. With the arrival of more Cybertronians, their transformations were no longer limited to vehicles, and they could no longer be as flexible as before. Looks like we need to build a new barracks and living quarters. David hadn't wanted to make any special arrangements, but the physical differences between Cybertronians and ordinary humans and elves were obvious and couldn't be ignored. Especially since Transformers were all mobile armories, their equipment was a complete mess. Improper supervision could easily lead to trouble. So David located the new Cybertronian barracks and living quarters north of Winter Camp, within the Winter Forest. Layout-wise, the Cybertronian barracks was actually part of Winter Camp, as the Decepticons who joined Winter City were also members of the Winter Legion. The Cybertronian living quarters were located north of the barracks, relatively far from the normal areas. However, David would not restrict the Decepticons' actions. He was bound by Wintertown's rules and laws. Megatron's first task was to regroup the Decepticons and establish a new home in Wintertown. He also had to teach them what not to do. Historically, Megatron had performed well in this regard. Starscream was the only Decepticon who frequently disregarded Megatron's orders and caused trouble. This lone troublemaker had long been killed by David, his body becoming part of his Cybertronian body. The remaining Decepticons, while possessing a variety of eccentric personalities, were all obedient to Megatron. Whether these Decepticons could truly integrate into Wintertown and become true citizens would require time to determine. David only needed to pay close attention to Megatron's efforts to gather the Decepticons and command their establishment of a settlement in the north. Upon his return from Azeroth with Megatron, Optimus Prime felt a complex emotion as he looked upon this old rival, a man he had fought for countless years. He knew the Megatron before him wasn't strictly speaking the same one from before, but the idea of him and Megatron becoming colleagues still felt strange. "I'm afraid it'll take me some time to truly adjust." "Then you'd better adjust quickly." David looked at Optimus Prime, who was only beginning to see more and more strange things happen. "Also, are you planning to build a temporary transit base on the far side of the moon or on Mars? The Transformers world wouldn't be completely abandoned. Many Cybertronians still live there. Even if Optimus Prime and Megatron joined forces, they couldn't bring all of them to this world in such a short time." Therefore, a transit station was necessary. Mars, the moon is still too close to Earth. With Cybertronian technology, getting from Mars to Earth wouldn't take long. In the original story, after Megatron was resurrected underwater, he transformed into a Cybertronian fighter and flew directly from Earth to Saturn in no time. Speaking of this, David thought, if the Cybertronians had appeared sooner and shared their Cybertronian technology, Mark might have returned to Earth long ago. But if he did so, he would exist only as a living undead in that world, and Mark Watney's official identity would likely be deemed dead on Mars. Of course, perhaps in the future, Mark would have the opportunity to explain the true situation to the authorities. By then, David's Winter faction might have grown so powerful that establishing cross-dimensional diplomatic relations would become commonplace. Is that possible? Don't we already have diplomatic relations with the Kingdom of Tiran, Quel'Therlus, Dalaran, Kultiris, and the Kingdom of Sparta? Looking at Mark, who had used special methods to make himself extremely thin and even look somewhat unhealthy, David knew he had endured a lot of hardship over the past 2 days. To achieve this effect, Mark had consumed a number of exotic potions, all prepared with the help of Apothecary Cordell. If that day really comes, would you say I'm an ambassador for Earth or for Winter? That depends on your personal thoughts. Of course I represent Winter. Mark was one of the first people to come here. He witnessed with his own eyes how the pioneering camp with nothing was built into a village, and then into the modern town with a vast area and complete infrastructure. He also planted the first potato, the first cabbage, the first radish, the first strawberry. Okay, I know you've made a great contribution. David raised his hand to stop Mark's nagging, patted his shoulder and said that this is also Mark's home. After returning to Earth to deal with those superficial things, he should come back quickly. There will be more vegetables and fruits waiting for Mark to plant next year. While I know you're making a point, I must emphasize again, I'm a botanist. And now, a shaman too. Got it. Newly minted shaman, Mark Watney. After a final hug with Mark, he watched him say goodbye to Laura, Fording, Steve, Peggy, Sharon, and the others who had come to see him off. Everyone watched Mark disappear before gradually dispersing. What's wrong? It feels a little strange. Laura noticed David's strange mood, and only after hearing David's response did she understand what was going on. Haven't you experienced this before? It's different. Since David obtained the gold finger, Mark was the first to leave for an extended period. Among the other companions, including Fording, who had returned to Azeroth to save the Kingdom of Tiran, even during his busiest times, he would frequently visit to stay in touch with David and the others. The rest were either permanent residents or frequent visitors, practically indistinguishable from permanent residents. Take Tony Stark, for example. If David hadn't noticed him constantly searching for Steve, he'd have almost forgotten he wasn't even a summoned companion. As his companions grew, no one simply left and never returned, so Mark's extended absence evoked a special feeling in David. After all, he wasn't a true young man with no experience, so David quickly recovered. He understood that everyone had their own perspectives, and no one could predict what the future would hold. It was even possible for once close friends to become enemies, or simply for their relationship to fade and cease contact. This was all perfectly normal. Perhaps, one day, his companions would return to their own worlds and never return again. Such a possibility wasn't impossible. If I never come again, will you miss me? Of course. David looked at Laura, who had a mischievous look on her face, clearly trying to cheer him up. And it's not just that I'll miss you. Oh? What are you going to do? Of course I'll find a way to find you and bring you back. Ha ha ha. Laura, unperturbed by the threat, simply grumbled, even if you wanted to, you couldn't. It's just that I can't do it right now. Having captured Frosttown and Snow Forest, David secured legal control of the entire northern plains. They could soon acquire more populations from Iron Forest and other areas of the Tiran kingdom. With the Decepticons tamed, the Winter Knights and Spartan Infantry Regiment were steadily increasing their combat effectiveness. New equipment was already on the agenda, and the Blizzard armor was becoming increasingly sophisticated, but the corresponding weapons still required further design, testing, and finalization. Only once these new weapons were produced could the Winter Knights be considered fully formed, even if their numbers were still small. Training and instruction in the Holy Light were not neglected, as it was the foundation of the Winter Order's strength. Liadrin's Cathedral of Light had already begun recruiting young apprentices, but it was unclear how long it would take to train qualified light priests. James Norrington had also begun preliminary preparations for his naval expansion plan, the construction of military docks, training ships, and a naval barracks for new recruits. David, his vision slowly becoming a reality, began to anticipate the upcoming upgrade to his Goldfinger. What new features would it offer? For example, the ability to travel to specific worlds with relative freedom? We'll have to wait a while to find out. Although Wintertown's upgrade to Winter City and David's ascension to Earl had been confirmed, the official appointment would take some time to reach David. Unexpectedly, before he could receive the appointment from the capital, he received a surprising proposal from Wendell Forrester, the eldest son of the Forrester family. Marriage. Chapter 239 Rejecting the Forrest Family. Ever since Sean Forrester wrote a personal letter to his family, he had been staying in Wintertown. Sean had kept a low profile during this time, so low-key that David had almost forgotten the fourth son of the Forrester family lived in his domain. Sean's daily life was simple. Every morning he'd wake up and head straight to the lobby for breakfast. While the Winter Inn was Wintertown's most luxurious and upscale hotel, it was actually the only one in the town. Its prices were still affordable, and many people had grown accustomed to its cuisine, resulting in a large number of guests dining there daily. As the innkeeper, Jonah would often chat with guests in the lobby, and these were Sean's targets. He would quietly approach, listening to their conversations while eating, allowing him to better understand the town. He had been spotted a few times, but the residents of Wintertown, while not exactly welcoming, showed no hostility towards the former mayor of Frostbite. Occasionally, he would chat with Sean. Over time, Sean became familiar with some of the people, smiling and greeting them whenever they saw him. In the past, Sean could never have imagined spending a day chatting with a group of ordinary people. But this also allowed him to gain a deeper understanding of Wintertown. While he still didn't know where those massive metal giants came from, or who provided Wintertown's novel technological equipment, Sean Forrester had confirmed countless times that Wintertown was incredibly powerful. This strength wasn't just reflected in the winter nights he'd seen, but also in the rapid construction of the town itself, the metal warships anchored on the river, the increasing number of soldiers undergoing training, and the growing number of metal giants. His only concern was that his letter wouldn't be taken seriously by his family. If that happened, he'd have to go back and convince his father personally that he absolutely couldn't continue to oppose Wintertown. Not only that, he had to make peace with it. Sean Forrester was fortunate that his eldest brother, Wendell Forrester, the undisputed heir to the Forrester family patriarchate and earldom, had arrived in Wintertown with genuine intentions. After carefully touring the magical town with his brother, Wendell Forrester was convinced that his brother's letter was not exaggerated, and even contained some reservations. Wintertown and Baron David Glamorgan possessed far more formidable power than Sean had mentioned in his letter or the information the family had gathered from various sources. Seeing this, Wendell knew what he had to do. He immediately chose the most crucial option for David Glamorgan and the Forrester family, one of the several plans the family had devised before their departure. Yes, my sister, Candace Forrester, will be 16 next year. She has been educated in etiquette and culture since childhood. She possesses both exceptional knowledge and beauty, and will undoubtedly make an excellent wife for a lord. After much discussion, the Forrester family decided on a marriage with Baron Glamorgan. If they can't be eliminated, then they'll win them over. Baron Glamorgan's rise is undeniable. Even as their families discuss this, the winter forces have effectively taken over half of the northern plains. While the population may be smaller, this problem is solvable. The Forresters are happy to assist, provided Baron Glamorgan becomes a true member of their group. Furthermore, the Forresters aren't just handing over some random girl from a branch family or a relative, they're marrying Earl Percy Forrester's only daughter, a beloved youngest daughter of the elder Earl Forrester. This clearly demonstrates the Forresters' sincerity. Once Baron Glamorgan marries Candace as the Lord Winter's wife, the Forresters will mobilize all their resources to help increase the population of Baron Glamorgan's domain, ensuring its rapid growth. A stronger Glamorgan domain will naturally bring further benefits to the Forresters, providing their family members with another avenue to obtain official positions and even noble titles. Especially with Wintertown's rapid growth, positions are in short supply, all of which the Forresters could vie for. The Forresters wouldn't force Baron Glamorgan to help their members find a future. Instead, if both parties' conditions were comparable, Baron Glamorgan would provide appropriate care for them. The Forresters viewed the proposal as a win-win. Baron Glamorgan would gain a stronger and more prosperous domain, while the Forresters would maintain their position as a leading noble, perhaps even expanding their influence beyond Iron Tree Keep into the northern plains. Therefore, the Foresters believed Baron David Glamorgan would likely agree to their proposal. However, for safety's sake, Wendell Forrest, rather than the patriarch, Earl Percy Forrest, was the one who came this time. If the old Earl Forrest personally proposed the marriage to David, that would leave little room for maneuver. An agreement would be a win-win, but a refusal could easily lead to hostility, potentially turning a good thing into a bad one. Wendell's arrival would have eliminated this difficulty. He could first express his intentions and ascertain David's personal thoughts and attitudes. As long as David agreed, old Earl Forrester would then finalize the marriage. If David disagreed, both parties could pretend nothing had happened. After all, Wendell was ostensibly there to fetch his brother, Sean Forrester. Fortunately, the Forrester family maintained their usual style, so the confident Wendell didn't lose his composure when David said no. Combing himself and calming down, Wendell glanced at Helen, who was pouring tea for David, and then thought of Eva, the secretary, whom he had met at the door upon entering. Add to that Laura Croft, mentioned in the intelligence report as having a close relationship with Baron David Glamorgan, and Sharon Rogers, who had accompanied David to the capital. Clearly, the Baron had a fascinating private life, and Baron David Glamorgan clearly didn't want to ruin it for a single marriage. Since the other party wasn't willing, Wendell had no choice but to brush the subject aside, not saying anything like, "Even if the marriage is arranged, you can continue this wonderful life." There were some things he couldn't say, even if they were true. Besides, this matter involved his beloved sister. He suddenly thought that perhaps David's refusal to marry his sister might be a good thing for Candace. Candace had no shortage of suitors, including many outstanding nobles. Wendell simply discussed other possible cooperation options with David. Marriage wasn't an option, but an alliance was possible. Even if it was just a verbal agreement, it would at least ease the current tensions between the two sides. Wendell also brought a ransom and reward, as per custom, thanking Baron Glamorgan for his previous assistance to Frostbite and his brother. In addition to the indentured farmers and artisans originally from Frostbite, the Forrest family will send another 300 young men to Wintertown next spring. Wintertown was short of men, so the Forrest family chose to send David these men, recruited from Iron Tree Keep as well as from nearby towns and villages. Finding able-bodied individuals of the right age and poverty is easy, and with the Forrest family's reputation and resources, recruiting them is easy. Besides these, there are also ores, cloth, silk scrolls, and other items, including special materials like magic silk, monster hides, adamantium, and mithril. David accepted these items readily, and after accepting the payment, the two sides had no further topics to discuss. Wendell said goodbye to David at the right time, quickly packed his belongings, and left Wintertown with Sean Forrest. He needed to return to Iron Tree Keep to report the entire situation to the family, and to this end, he refused his brother Sean Forrest's request to stay in Wintertown. "I need you to go back and tell Father everything you know." Wendell's stay in Wintertown was too short, and he certainly didn't have as thorough a grasp of the situation as Sean. How would Sean's knowledge determine the Forrest family's future actions? As for the marriage, Wendell didn't think David's refusal was a big deal at the moment. If the relationship between the two families grew closer, perhaps there would be a new twist. But when Wendell returned to Iron Tree Castle with his brother and his guards, he knew the marriage between the Forrest and Glamorgan families would be impossible. The Forrest family had learned through various sources that the current king was considering marrying Princess Sophia to the Lord of Winter. Marrying the princess to that Baron of Glamorgan, Wendell and Sean were both shocked upon hearing the news. Wendell hadn't expected the king to place such high regard on the Lord of Winter. Sean, on the other hand, thought of a young man around his own age, a commoner just a few years earlier, who was now about to be promoted to earl and even marry the king's daughter. He felt a sense of shame, thinking of how he had looked down on him in the past. The person being discussed and lamented by the Forrest family was now lamenting something else. Didn't they say the blizzard armor had been finalized? Why is there an upgraded version? Finalized? Are you insulting me? Tony Stark pointed to a set of blizzard armor next to him. This thing doesn't even have a built-in constant temperature system. It can only be regarded as a test model, not a qualified finished product. So, this is the real blizzard power armor. Chapter 240. They are all my wings. Tony showed David a new set of power armor. Compared to the blizzard suit currently in use in Wintertown, this suit's exterior was minimal, featuring a specially treated black paint scheme. However, The internal changes were significant. A more sophisticated shock absorption system further enhanced the Blizzard suit's defenses, and Cybertronian energy shield technology was added. This eliminated the need for additional crystal ore powder to the armor plates. The energy required for the energy shield was directly generated by the crystal ore itself, which served as the suit's power source. The powder generated by cutting large blocks of crystal ore could be used to manufacture ammunition and weapons. Furthermore, the official version of the Blizzard power armor boasted a relatively comprehensive life support system, ensuring its wearers could operate normally in any season and most environments. Otherwise, when the weather gets too hot, the winter knights, wearing ovens, would have to rely on their mental strength and physical fortitude to withstand the heat. I absolutely hate to see that ridiculous situation happen. David realized he had previously overlooked this issue. He had assumed that since they were fighting on a planet, they didn't need to worry about life support for the time being, but he had overlooked the unique characteristics of the suit itself. Tony then briefed David on the weapons and equipment of the Blizzard power armor. Besides the standard issue main firearm, which was still under design, each suit of Blizzard power armor would come standard with a set of missile launchers capable of firing various small missiles. Equipment like the Vulcan cannon and grenade launcher wouldn't be installed directly onto the armor as standard equipment, but could be added if the soldier preferred or needed them. As for melee weapons, Tony hadn't done much research, but he felt that the Winter Knights wearing power armor didn't need to worry about defense at all, so shields seemed unnecessary. The primary weapon should also be large and heavy enough. Two-handed sledgehammers, two-handed swords, and battle axes might become the Winter Knights' go-to weapons. These cold weapons, also enhanced with crystal ore, were equally powerful. I've conducted tests. Compared to currently available technologies like lasers and vibroblades, these cold weapons infused with crystal ore are simpler, faster, and more powerful, making them suitable for mass deployment. More importantly, using these cold weapons doesn't consume the power armor's own crystal ore energy, allowing soldiers to maintain combat endurance for a longer period. Combined with a more convenient and simplified operating system, the Blizzard power armor is now truly a power armor. As long as you design a suitable primary firearm, your Winter Knight's basic equipment will be complete. Tony said he only needs another week to finalize the design for the new weapon. According to him, Wintertown's new firearms will move away from the current gunpowder-fired model and adopt technology similar to electromagnetic cannons, firing solid bullets. If successful, this would be a boon for Wintertown, as the current production of ammunition requires sourcing resources from multiple worlds, including Ironforge. If Tony's new plan succeeds, Wintertown will be free from this troublesome situation. New weapons and ammunition can be manufactured entirely from Wintertown's own resources. Even if more metal is needed for warheads, it can be transported from worlds like The Walking Dead. There's no need for Laura or Fording to buy it, as before. As for alchemical conversion, the Winter Alchemy Workshop currently has more important work and projects to attend to, and can't afford to spend all day converting metal into bullets. However, once the Winter Alchemy Workshop expands and has more alchemy apprentices, this could become possible. David's thoughts wandered slightly, until Tony reached out to him and snapped his fingers twice, bringing his attention back. Are you wondering if you've missed out on a great fiancé? While the Forester's marriage proposal to David was unknown to the ordinary people of Wintertown, it was known to these high-ranking officials. Tony teased David about it, expressing a slight dissatisfaction. How is that possible? Women only slow down my sword draw. I can't let that distract me. David glanced at Tony and gave him a small warning. Also, snapping your fingers isn't a good habit for you. Don't do it anymore. Tony didn't know what was wrong with snapping his fingers, just thinking David was just saying it casually. Don't think I don't know you can't use a sword at all. Oh, you caught me. After some banter, David chatted with Leonard and the others for a while. He realized that Leonard and the others had found their own joy in Wintertown, witnessing various familiar people and objects firsthand, and if they didn't have them, recreating them with their own hands. After Tony Stark and the Transformers brought Cybertronian technology to Wintertown, the possibility of realizing their various ideas was increasing. Come on, just don't blow up Wintertown. Haha, how could that happen? Leonard thought David's joke was amusing, but remembering the elevator in his Pasadena apartment, he felt his response lacked confidence. Don't worry, I'll keep an eye on Sheldon for you. After leaving Stark Manor and returning to Castle Glamorgan, David met Steve again. The ambitious, star-spangled man, now undecided as Captain America, Captain Hydra, or Captain Supreme, approached him with a sturdy, middle-aged man. "This is Brock Rumlow," Steve emphasized. "I've already explained everything to him." David studied the man before him carefully, and the man opposite him also examined David curiously. David's knowledge of Crossbones was limited to his appearances in a few Marvel films, a skilled and experienced soldier, also a capable special operations commander. But to Rumlow, the young man before him was more of a mystery. A lord of another world, a special being capable of communicating with other worlds, a mysterious and powerful being who wields the holy light. He had learned a great deal from his superior, Steve Rogers, and he also knew that the city beneath his feet, called Wintertown, was undergoing rapid development and might soon become the Winter Empire. Here, he could better demonstrate his worth while also gaining benefits unimaginable to ordinary people. "It is an honor to meet you, Lord. Welcome to Wintertown, Brock." David didn't need to bother with Crossbones' arrangements, he could simply be thrown directly into the Winter Knights. If he wanted to prove his worth in Wintertown, the first thing he had to do was complete his training with the Winter Knights. This wasn't meant to be a humiliation or a test, rather, during the Winter Knights training program, Rumlow could rapidly improve his abilities, learn knowledge of the Holy Light and the Arcane, and lay the foundation for transcending the mortal realm and mastering extraordinary powers. Furthermore, if Rumlow wanted to prove his worth here, he had no choice but to join the military, which would also allow him to quickly understand Wintertown's military situation. Rumlow himself had no objections to this arrangement. After a brief discussion, Steve personally showed him around and also took him to the winter camp to report to Floyd. Because of Rumlow's unique situation, his training would likely be conducted separately, and this would require prior consultation with Floyd, who oversaw the training of the Winter Knights. After Steve left with Rumlow, Helen, who had been quietly standing nearby, suddenly asked David, "Can my brothers come here to train with the Winter Knights?" "Your brothers?" "Yes, Castor and Pollux." Helen had twin brothers and a twin sister, Clytemnestra. The four siblings had always had a close relationship. When Helen was abducted by Theseus as a child, it was her brothers who led the troops to rescue her and bring her back to Sparta. Now that Steve was bringing someone to train, Helen, already aware of the significance of this, naturally remembered her brothers. She hoped they too would master these magical powers. Of course, David didn't think it was a big deal. He was overjoyed that Helen had volunteered to send her brother to the Knights of Winter. He even began to imagine that the Spartan army, trained in Wintertown, would soon unify Europe and that world, establish an immense nation, and then, would David be enshrined as their chief deity? A Greek god from the north, with a titanic body, wielding a golden spear, and wielding holy light. Unconsciously, he'd accumulated a ton of buffs, but David felt it wasn't a big deal. He could always add more, like wings. Meanwhile, after days of deliberation, King Tiran had finally finalized a series of decisions. Baron David Glamorgan would be officially promoted to Earl for his contributions in defending the kingdom's borders and as the de facto overlord of all affairs in the northern plains. Wintertown would be elevated to Winter City from today. From the date of this announcement, the Kingdom of Tiran began forcibly relocating young and unemployed men without land or contracts to the northern plains to become citizens of Winter City. Earl Sutton Stewart will travel to Winterfell as an envoy to deliver the letter of appointment to Earl David Glamorgan. He will also be ordered to observe the orc threat on the border to determine whether the kingdom should send elite troops to support Winterfell. And, escort Princess Sophia to the northern plains. Chapter 241 2 Years Achievements. Winter has arrived again, but this year's winter on the northern plains is a bit different from last year's. There's no blanketing blizzard like last year, transforming the plains into a snowy landscape. It's simply cold. The dry, cold weather, coupled with the relentless howling wind, feels like being sliced by blades. When the residents of Snowfort were ordered to relocate to Wintertown, they worried about whether Wintertown would provide them with adequate warm accommodations. After all, with so many people relocated at once, no town would have so many vacant homes, would they? They didn't want to freeze to death. These concerns grew as the chill wind blew against them, until they arrived in Wintertown. With its clean streets and sturdy, warm houses that felt like summer, the newcomers fell in love with the city in less than a day. They suddenly felt fortunate to be citizens of Wintertown. Although the houses were currently only rented to them, they would have to repay the rent once winter passed. However, the comfortable living conditions of Wintertown, along with the vast expanses of uncultivated land surrounding it, rekindled the hopes of the new arrivals. It's truly changed. Fording had recently had some free time, so during his routine visit to Wintertown, he didn't rush back to Azeroth, but instead expressed a desire to explore the present-day Wintertown. He felt that if he didn't explore it properly, he might not even be able to find David next time. Fording's thought was perfectly fine, and David was willing to accompany him. It also offered him the opportunity to familiarize himself with his territory. Come to think of it, I haven't had a proper tour of my own territory in a while. The Decepticons and Autobots were still steadily migrating, and the basic framework of the barracks and living quarters provided for the Cybertronians had been completed. They could then complete the subsequent internal construction and renovations themselves. The newly arrived Decepticons in Wintertown have already begun making significant contributions to the town. Although the orcs outside Snaufort have been defeated, they show no sign of retreating. RC's reconnaissance efforts reveal that the orcs have established a sentry fort east of Snaufort, seemingly preparing for a prolonged standoff. Seeing this, the newly arrived Decepticons lightning and shatter blasted the newly erected fortress into ruins. Both Decepticons are rare triple metamorphs, possessing exceptional combat power. Their arrival has also eased RC's workload, freeing her from the numerous daily patrols and the complexities of patrolling, support, and ground strikes. David, in turn, has also experienced a significant reduction in his workload. He now awaits Elias's return in Wintertown and prepares to welcome Lord Sutton Stewart, the kingdom's envoy, and Princess Sophia. Speaking of the princess, Fording glanced at David, then at Laura, who had accompanied him on a tour of Wintertown. How are you going to respond? Just like I'd replied to the Foresters, I think it's not that simple. The king wants to marry his daughter to you, and he's even sending her here as part of a delegation of envoys. Can you just refuse? Maybe I don't even need to refuse, David said with an inexplicable confidence. Once Princess Sophia arrives in Wintertown and sees the situation here, she probably won't want to marry me anymore. Fording didn't initially understand what David meant. It took a few seconds to realize David was probably calculating, showing his worst side to make the princess dislike him and refuse to marry into Wintertown. On second thought, this strategy seemed quite likely to succeed, though it was a bit ironic. Aren't you afraid of angering King Tiran and incurring his revenge? No. As David drove the open jeep to the winter camp, Fording understood David's confidence. The camp, which had undergone countless expansions, was bustling with activity. Not only were some of the winter knights remaining in Wintertown undergoing routine training, but the Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment was also training. The Spartan I, having undergone a period of rigorous training, had begun learning to operate the Blizzard power armor, while even more Spartans were undergoing new recruit training on the training grounds. Those are the Spartan IIs who just arrived in Wintertown. The Spartan I class consisted of 100 men, and the Spartan II class was expected to reach 200. This time, the King of Sparta had made a significant investment, sending a total of 1,000 strong men. 500 of them would remain in Wintertown and be incorporated into the Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment. The remainder would return to the Spartan Kingdom and become the main force of the Spartan army. David also spotted Crossbones Romlo and Helen's two brothers, Castor and Pollux, among the new recruits. Castor and Pollux are the Geminis of Greek legend, and Helen's twin sister was the wife of Agamemnon, the Greek commander of the Trojan War. David's knowledge of Greek legends wasn't as detailed as Laura's, and when he heard the names of Helen's brothers, he had no idea who they were. Now that Laura had introduced them, he realized that Helen's siblings were no ordinary people. I wonder if these Helen brothers and sisters will display any special talents. Although Helen, who came to his own world, was an ordinary human from an ordinary world, such a special existence with a name and a surname, naturally had a certain aura surrounding them. Now in Wintertown, perhaps this aura would be strengthened? This thought reminded him of Helen's world, where there were many famous heroes. He wondered if he could snag one of them later. Aside from the Greek heroes, Wintertown's most formidable force currently lies with the Cybertronians who have recently settled here, especially the Decepticons. These Decepticons seem to enjoy life in the winter barracks. The sight of so many Decepticons gathered to watch the action is not only stunning but also strangely endearing. I've suddenly been thinking, when Lord Arryn is fully restored and the Alliance launches its offensive against Northrend, I should invite your Winter Legion to join. Fording observed the Decepticons watching nearby, thinking that with the help of these Cybertronians, the Alliance might be able to defeat the Lich King Ner'zhul more quickly. That shouldn't be a problem, while the Decepticons, under Megatron's control, have been able to stay quiet and docile. Keeping them contained can easily lead to conflict. The best solution is to let them out and have some fun. There are orcs to fight on the continent of Brunia. If that's not exciting enough, we can send them to Azeroth. After a tour of the barracks, Fording even tried out the newly manufactured Blizzard power armor. Judging by the old Paladin's expression after using it, he likely wouldn't be satisfied unless he had a set. He then visited the Marine recruit barracks, but James Norrington and the new sailors he was training were not there. According to the camp guards, Commander Norrington had gone with the recruits to practice boat handling. That's perfect. Next, we'll go to the Winter River. Leaving Winter Barracks, David took a quick look outside the Cybertronian living quarters. The area was currently quite empty, and David had no idea what it would look like in the future. He then visited the garbage and wastewater treatment plant, power plant, waterworks, and Stark Manor. Fording focused on the automated production plant beneath Stark Manor. He was deeply intrigued by it and even asked Tony Stark if he could help build such an automated weapons factory if the Kingdom of Tiran wanted one. And a power plant. Fording, having actually used modern electronic equipment, knew how convenient it was. He felt that after eradicating the scourge, the Kingdom of Tiran should also embark on a path of modernization. He planned to return and suggest to Princess Kalia Menethil that while Tiran's capital was being repaired, it should undergo modernization, ushering in a new era for the Kingdom of Tiran. After receiving Tony's response that it shouldn't be a problem, Fording left satisfied. His next step was to visit the winter docks. There, Fording saw not only the civilian docks but also the recently constructed military docks. The Skyfire transformed cruiser had also been moored at the military docks, while a wooden sailboat was teetering in circles on the river not far away. Is that your navy? After all, they're all inexperienced rookies. James thought using a sail training ship to familiarize them with shipboard life and foster team chemistry was the most appropriate training plan for the time being. The Winter River had been rough these past few days, and Norrington likely noticed this and brought the new recruits aboard for training. Anyway, it's a good start. Fording followed David around and gained a new understanding of the current Winter Town, or it could already be called Winter City. Compared to the small village where he lived before, there was nothing in common. Apart from a smaller population, Winter City had developed into a city that was more advanced and beautiful than the capital of Tiran. It's unbelievable. It's only been 2 years. After all, I'm on a roll. The most important factor in being able to build and develop so quickly was the diggers. Without this group of Cybertron construction maniacs, it would have been impossible to build so many facilities in such a short time. Maybe you'll want to visit again after a while. Chapter 242. What bad intentions could Laura have? After a long tour of Winter Town, their final stop was the dungeon, located in the training room on the second basement floor. This training room had undergone a simple renovation, becoming a dedicated entrance to the dungeon. Besides removing some of the original tools, they had also installed specialized equipment and tables and chairs. For example, a display board hung on the wall next to the dungeon's entrance held space for 5 names. Anyone entering the dungeon was required to hang their name on it. There was also a dedicated reservation board, where people could enter with their time and name to avoid conflicts when trying to use the dungeon for training. Currently, the dungeon only allowed 5 people in, and everyone had tacitly agreed to keep it occupied by a maximum of 3 people. The 2 spots reserved were specifically for David. As the Lord of Winter, and the one responsible for the creation of these magical objects, he naturally had the authority to use them whenever he wished. Furthermore, due to the dungeon's unique circumstances, it seemed necessary to assign dedicated personnel to oversee it, and Aedan took the initiative. In other words, Aedan's official role in Wintertown was the dungeon keeper, who also watched over the servants from Castle Glamorgan when they came to clean up. He had no objection to this role, as he frequently went into the dungeon to kill monsters. He found that as he continued to improve his skills, he felt a certain pressure gradually eased, and this once somewhat tedious task became more motivated. How are you feeling lately? I think I'm getting better. The most obvious difference between Aedan and the other alien visitors to Wintertown was that he could return to his own world, but he didn't want to. Now that he saw hope for resolving his own problems, he deeply regretted his decision to insert the soul stone into his skull. It now seemed so foolish. I think if you keep working hard, you might be able to completely get rid of this big problem that is Diablo. I hope so. Aedan touched his forehead. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that the soul stone had shrunk. Regardless, he had found hope in Wintertown, and his life was free of any troubles. Lord David took good care of him, and he didn't have to do any heavy work. Even the guard duty here was a volunteer effort. Is no one in the dungeon today? Leon and Jack just left. Oh, after a brief chat, Fordring greeted Aedan. Fordring had a heartfelt admiration for the hero who had once saved his world. It was a pity Aedan's current situation was unusual, otherwise Fordring would have wanted to bring him to Lordaeron. He seemed like a prince, perfect for pairing with Queen Kalia, raising a worthy offspring for Lordaeron. When Fordring expressed his thoughts, David, who was mowing down monsters in the blood wastes, thought Fordring had a brilliant idea. If Aedan married Kalia Menethil, would he eventually give birth to Leah Pineapple? Or was Leah already in her mother's womb? Besides, Aedan is a human from the world of Sanctuary, and the humans of that world are far from ordinary. Their true power is suppressed by the World Stone, making them essentially the offspring of angels and demons. Huh? David, brandishing his golden spear, slashing zombies with a water stream from its blade, suddenly remembered something he'd overlooked. Aedan has left Sanctuary now, and then. There's no World Stone on the continent of Brunia that can suppress the power of the Nephilim. Laura didn't fire her arrows. Instead, she brought her two captured northern giant wolves into the dungeon, summoned creatures and pets don't count, commanding them to destroy the monsters, hoping to see if they could improve their abilities here. After just a few zombie kills, the two northern giant wolves realized the benefits of killing monsters here and immediately rushed off, howling. Just then, Laura heard David's question and gave him a surprised look. You've only just thought of this. Whenever a new person appeared in Winter City, Laura would look up their information. She was an archaeologist, not a gaming or anime expert. So, she had only researched Aedan's information and some of the settings of the Dark World, learning about the existence of the Nephilim. She'd assumed David had already thought of these things, but hadn't considered them important enough to mention them. Surprisingly, David hadn't even thought of them. But come to think of it, it doesn't seem to affect us much. The Nephilim had simply awakened a suppressed power, they hadn't suddenly transformed into someone else. If Aedan could become stronger and resolve the threat posed by Diablo, wouldn't that be a bad thing for Wintertown? Nor would it be a bad thing for Sanctuary. After chatting about Aedan, they turned to the dungeon world they were currently in. After experiencing it for a while, Fordring felt that the dungeon world was a great training ground, allowing ordinary people to grow stronger relatively steadily. Ordinary people who would come to Wintertown in the future would be blessed. Even if they couldn't comprehend the mysterious energy themselves, unable to master extraordinary powers through study and practice, they could still become stronger through this dungeon. As all qualities improve, mastering certain mysterious powers becomes easier. In other words, if someone can reach Wintertown, avoid David's dislike, and become his friend, their life will be completely transformed. From what you just said, this dungeon has higher difficulties. Yes, so, after unlocking the higher difficulties, will stronger players be able to improve their strength through the dungeons? Honestly, I don't know. While that's theoretically true, David doesn't know exactly what the effects will be once those two difficulties are unlocked. He also doesn't know at what point the improvement won't be significant. But I think as long as there's an effect, even if it's very slight, then it's good. Of course, as long as there's an improvement, it means they can continue to improve their strength, regardless of bottlenecks. For beings like them, this thing is simply a magical tool. Just like David, even in the current normal difficulty dungeon world, he can actually improve himself by killing these weak monsters. As long as he doesn't mind the boredom and keeps grinding here, his strength will eventually reach a new level. What are you thinking about? Seeing Fordring's sudden silence, David thought the old paladin was thinking something sinister, but when he spoke, David realized he'd misjudged his thoughts. I was thinking, maybe I should let my boy stay with you for a while. Such a great opportunity. We can't let the migraines have it all to ourselves. David wanted to rant about Fordring. Wasn't it your idea to send Renault to Winterfell? Why did you now think Renault and Migraine had gotten such a great deal? He grumbled inwardly, then said that Teelan could come to Winterfell any time. Winterfell was just beginning to train paladins, and it was clear that Renault alone was overwhelmed. That's perfect. I'll have Teelan, and bring a few paladin instructors to Winterfell. The Knights of the Silver Hand had many excellent paladins, but many of them had been seriously injured in the battle against the Scourge and needed to recuperate, and many could no longer fight on the battlefield. They had been relegated to secondary support duties. They could be sent to Wintertown to help David train and develop paladins. Of course, these men were only on loan to Wintertown, Giving them away was out of the question. The kingdom of Lord Tiran was in ruins, including the Knights of the Silver Hand, which had been severely damaged by successive wars. These veterans were crucial to the Silver Hand's recovery and couldn't be let go for nothing. Having settled the matter, Fordring didn't linger in the dungeon any longer. Perhaps he would return to Wintertown in the future to improve his skills through the dungeons, but that would require unlocking higher difficulties, and he simply wasn't interested in the current level. I just hope that the difficulty unlock is universal. If the dungeon's difficulty was tied to a specific person, he'd have to spend time completing it on normal difficulty, which would be a real chore. After discussing this, Fordring, who had spent a full day thoroughly exploring Wintertown, returned to Stark Manor and returned to Azeroth carrying a brand new set of Blizzard power armor. David pondered Fordring's question, shouldn't the difficulty of this dungeon be tied to a specific person? Come to think of it, this dungeon's been here for a while, and no one's cleared it yet, David thought. It seemed like everyone else was busy, leaving him, Laura, and Helen relatively free. How about calling Helen, and we work together to clear the dungeon on normal difficulty? Laura was about to decline, but then something struck her. Going into the dungeon to improve her pet's strength would be a good idea. Besides, there seemed to be other fun things to do. Just me and Helen, who else do you want to take? What about Eva and Gwen? They both need to improve their strength, right? Indeed, David nodded. Although Eva had earned the Holy Light's recognition, she still needed to improve herself and gain some combat experience. Gwen, on the other hand, was just a healthy, average girl. However, he always felt that there was some conspiracy hidden in Laura's suggestion. Why do I feel like you're planning something? How is that possible? Laura waved her hands, shook her head, and denied loudly, what bad intentions could I have, really? Chapter 243 The daily routine of brushing begins. Although Laura repeatedly insisted she was simply thinking about her companions, David didn't believe her. But he had to admit there was some truth to what Laura said. Gwen and Eva really needed to improve their skills. Even if it was out of selfish motives, Gwen couldn't always maintain her ordinary state. I'm going to find Eva and see if Gwen's here. Laura took Helen to make some preparations. He had originally planned to take Helen into the dungeon world with Laura and herself, while Helen would just watch the action, kill isolated monsters, or provide finishing blows. He didn't expect Helen to show any combat talent. As long as she could improve her skills, she could completely dominate low-level monsters in the future. While this approach might be slower, it would be more stable. Now David had changed his mind. Perhaps he could let a few people hone their skills? Besides, they had to know how to use their own weapons and equipment, right? He didn't expect everyone to become a warrior goddess like Laura, but they had to have basic self-defense skills. After all, who knew when something unexpected would happen? Countless films, TV series, novels, and anime feature similar plots. The protagonist's friends, family, and lovers are always targeted by their enemies. Laura wasn't worried. The archaeologist was lucky not to visit other people's homes or ancestral graves. Anyone who dared to provoke her would be facing a catastrophe. Although Eva remained confined to Wintertown for years, perhaps an assassin might come? Just like what happened to him. As Tony continued to analyze the data transmitted by Pretender 1, he realized the situation on the Bronia continent might be far more dangerous than he had previously suspected. After various analyses and tests of the Golden Light, he came to a shocking conclusion: it resembled a spear. The Golden Light's world within it was an energy somewhat similar to Holy Light. When David heard this information, he thought of the temple and the so-called God of Light, Lumiere. The temple, the Eternal Night Empire, the orcs, these seemingly unrelated forces, yet all were manipulated by a deity. There were also the God of War and the Goddess of Harvest, worshipped when humans defeated the Dark Elves. Van Cleef learned from Wilcox that these two were not among the deities worshipped by the temple. The assassin who had mistaken himself for a temple priest had suspected he had defected to the remnants of the old gods. Could it be that the various wars on Bronia were a struggle between the old and new gods? Is it really that simple? He pondered for a moment, realizing that the information was still too limited and one-sided. He needed more information to understand the truth. The easiest way to gain more information was to become a force to be reckoned with on Bronia. Even if David didn't seek out the gods, they would surely pay attention to him. Once that happened, the truth would be closer and closer. Assuming I don't get annihilated by those gods, David had originally been quite satisfied with his own strength. The various talents he had received from his companions had enabled him to grow rapidly. With his current strength, even without the special privileges he possessed, if he were to travel to Azeroth, he would be a formidable user of the Holy Light. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, being a superhero could land you on the A-list. He'd originally thought his current strength was more than enough to protect himself in this world, but now it seems he was too optimistic. Sure enough, in a world like this with a mysterious side, there's always a ton of bizarre gods and demons popping up. Lamenting the depths of this world, David found Eva, who was sorting through documents. As the Lord Secretary, Eva handled a number of documents daily, primarily covering the daily developments in Wintertown, intelligence reports from within and surrounding factions, and changes in military training and equipment. This was convenient for David to review whenever he needed it. However, as things got on track, the work, despite the daily processing, felt less overwhelming and chaotic than it had initially been. With each matter assigned a responsible person, the information that arrived at Eva's desk was already organized, and she only needed to file it. So, when David found Eva, she had already finished her work for the day and was relaxing with a cup of hot tea. Seeing David approach her, a bright smile immediately spread across her face. No matter what David wanted to see her about, Eva was always happy when he came. What's going on? David told Eva his plans. He planned to take advantage of this relatively free time to take Eva, Gwen, Helen, and the others to improve their strength. Eva had originally not cared much about such matters, believing that she had already obtained the miraculous power of Holy Light and that she could gradually improve it through systematic practice. But after David whispered a few words in her ear, Eva blushed and nodded firmly, immediately changing her mind and aiming to further improve her strength. Have you seen Gwen? Gwen's here. I'll contact her directly. It wasn't just Gwen. Many people who wanted to see David would stop by Eva's place. Generally, even if David wasn't in the office, Eva knew where he was. She didn't contact him directly to avoid disturbing David and interrupting his work. It's good to be here. That way we don't have to wait for her. The biggest problem was that Gwen wasn't in Wintertown, so there was no telling how long it would take for her to come. Young Gwen was the one most reluctant to part with David, coming over whenever she had a free moment. But she had her own things to do, and she might be delayed. David currently lacked interdimensional communication capabilities or equipment, making it difficult to find specific people. He took Eva with him to reunite with Gwen. Instead of heading directly to the dungeon, he first went to retrieve some weapons and equipment, fully outfitting both women. David had originally intended for them to wear blizzard armor, but even with the upgrades, it still had some limitations. Eva's current physique might be barely adequate, but Gwen certainly wouldn't be able to handle it. So, they simply changed into more conventional armor. Eva, being in better shape, wore full body armor, while Gwen was forced to wear lighter armor, metal on the chest, arms, and greaves, with leather covering the rest. He also had a piano pistol and a Garand rifle, along with other equipment. David also replenished Gwen's body with holy light to ensure her safety. Isn't that dungeon supposed to be a game world? And could there be danger? Gwen was curious about the dungeon, and today was a good chance to go in and see it for herself. Seeing David replenishing his holy light, she felt strangely nervous. I don't know, because no one has been injured in there so far, even more so than being seriously injured or even killed by monsters. Akira's healing abilities would only be tested after David and the others incurred some wounds themselves. Don't worry, Laura and I will follow. You won't be in any danger. After expanding Gwen and Eva's storage bracelets to 5 cubic meters, David had them both pack ammunition and spare weapons, and then, fully armed, he reunited with Laura and Helen. That's all Helen has. Compared to Eva and Gwen, Helen wore even simpler light armor and carried only a longsword and a pistol, but she seemed unfazed. Aren't there merchants in the dungeon? In the dungeon, there are merchants where you can buy weapons and equipment, using currency earned from monsters. Monsters also drop equipment, just like in the game, but it's just ordinary armor and weapons, nothing compared to what Wintertown currently has. As for whether they'll be able to get better equipment in the future, that's still unknown. Let's go. Anyway, if Helen feels like she's running low on equipment, they can always come back for more, and it won't take much time. Entering the dungeon, Helen, Gwen, and Eva, unlike Laura and David, who had been there several times before, surveyed their surroundings with curiosity. The NPCs, in particular, were so lifelike that if you didn't talk to them, you wouldn't have guessed they were just simulated figures. How amazing! While being able to travel between worlds, from one's own world to Wintertown, was already amazing, entering a world resembling a game was something completely different. The thought of improving my physical fitness here, just like playing a game, made me wonder if I wasn't actually real. Helen's thoughts weren't that complicated. She'd always considered David a god, so it wasn't surprising that a god possessed any miraculous powers. She was simply excited about the increasing benefits she could gain through David. What should we do next? Laura will take you to the camp gate to kill a few zombies and other monsters to help you learn and adapt to combat. I'll go take on the quests. He'd been here several times and hadn't completed a single quest. This time, he planned to clear normal difficulty straight away, but he wasn't sure how long it would take. Shouldn't be long, right? Strolling to Akara, David bought a few scrolls of city port and a few potions. He'd already taken a few of these items out before, giving them to Medivh, Jaina, and Cordell for research. He wondered if they could find any results. If they could figure it out and mass-produce them, these potions could become standard soldier equipment, or even integrated into Blizzard battle gear, automatically injecting them when a soldier's health was low. Speaking of which, there's a lot of good stuff in this world. We could take this opportunity to collect it. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 244, Closer Unity Around David. Boom. Bang. Bang. Boom. David leaned against the cave wall, using holy light to create a shield around his ears, shielding himself from the terrifying noises. He quietly watched the women's performance. David wasn't surprised by Eva's impressive performance. Even though she was a civilian officer, Eva was still a soldier, trained in military tactics. After a period of adjustment, she quickly found her rhythm. She effortlessly switched between the Garand rifle and the piano pistol, ensuring she could eliminate her targets from a safe distance. So far, Eva hadn't used a melee weapon. Even if a situation arose, she, having already begun studying holy light spells, could use smite strikes to eliminate any threatening foe. Eva's fighting style confirmed to David that despite her impressive physique and the ease with which she could maneuver through heavy armor, she likely wasn't a paladin. Becoming a holy light priest was probably Eva's best option. Her usual duties mostly involved staying behind the scenes, so mastering the various skills of a holy light priest would be enough for her to protect herself effectively. As for Helen, David felt he might have underestimated her. In Legends, Helen was like a beautiful ornament, fought over and plundered. Beyond her stunning beauty, she displayed no special talents. But she was a Spartan princess after all. Her determination to charge forward once she identified her target, completely disregarding the consequences, spoke volumes about her character. So, it wasn't surprising to see Helen, sword in one hand and gun in the other, slashing through the monsters in the evil caverns. In contrast, Gwen's behavior was more consistent with her status as an ordinary high school girl. Outside the camp, she was able to fire with relative ease due to the open terrain and the scarcity of monsters. But once inside the evil caverns, her performance was completely ineffective. Watching the action from the sidelines with her gun in hand was the best she could do, because if she panicked and fired recklessly, she might accidentally injure Helen, who was charging ahead. I originally thought Gwen had the most potential among the group, but now it seems that's not the case at all, because Spider-Gwen had appeared in numerous Marvel parallel universes. David had always felt Gwen possessed considerable potential and was worth cultivating. It seemed he'd been mistaken. Gwen didn't seem to have any fighting talent. It was just that she had a clear mind and knew not to cause trouble in this situation. But this wouldn't work. Besides learning and comprehension, the dungeon was the easiest, most mindless way to improve. If Gwen couldn't improve here, then David could only hope to obtain some other unique item that would allow her to become a transcendent being. Just as David was about to offer personal guidance and encouragement to Gwen, Laura made her move. Be confident. Don't worry about accidentally hurting Helen. She's wearing armor. Those who knew were stating the truth, while those who didn't might think Laura was using Gwen to eliminate Helen. You can aim at those monsters on the periphery, far enough away from Helen, especially those fallen demon wizards who like to throw fireballs with their wands. Look, that's the guy. Bang! The gunshot rang out, and the fallen demon wizard was still alive and kicking. throwing fireballs and resurrecting the killed fallen demons. It was unknown where Gwen's shot hit, but Laura still encouraged him. "Well done, don't be nervous, they can't threaten you. Aim well. Hold your breath. Lock on the target. Shoot." Bang! The fallen demon wizard fell backwards, and Gwen, who had accurately killed the target, also laughed. She glanced at Laura beside her, and then felt that this scene was strange. If it was David who had just embraced her and taught her step by step, it would not be so strange. "Oh," David coughed forcefully, appearing at Gwen's side just in time to praise her performance. He watched as this ordinary high school girl's nervousness and awkwardness gradually faded, and she began to find the joy of this game. As Gwen continued to feel her own abilities improve, she too became addicted to this monster-killing game. Her successive kills gave her a boost of confidence, and she was no longer as timid as before. Seeing the others gradually find their rhythm, David stopped simply watching and drew his golden spear to join the fray. As David and Laura began their actions, the monsters in the evil cave were quickly cleared out. The once gloomy and dark cave was no longer as dark as when they first entered. Everyone could clearly feel their vision expanding, not because their physical abilities had significantly improved, but because the dark force within the cave was gradually dissipating. After the battle in the evil cave, aside from Helen and Eva, Gwen finally demonstrated some combat talent. Even in the midst of immense chaos, she managed to maintain a relatively calm mind, carefully observing her surroundings and avoiding making poor choices. Furthermore, Gwen's reflexes were exceptional for a typical person, and she was able to react promptly to occasional emergencies, completely eliminating the need for David and Laura to babysit her. This significantly increased everyone's leveling and clearing efficiency. After completing the first mission, they quickly completed the second, eliminating the Blood Crow, and the third, rescuing Deckard Cain. During this time, Helen, Gwen, and Eva continued to clear minor enemies, while David personally dispatched bosses like the Blood Crow and Griswold. While he claimed to have personally dispatched them, it was merely a headshot from a Holy Light Hunter and a chest shot from a Golden Lance, requiring no effort at all. To his dismay, after 3 consecutive missions, he had yielded nothing but junk equipment, useless beyond selling it for currency in this world. Isn't there something off about the equipment drop rate? Not only are there no gold items, I haven't even seen any blue equipment with any stats. Returning to Rogue Camp and selling off his odds and ends, David began to wonder if this dungeon simply didn't produce any high-level equipment. Maybe it's just that high-level equipment is incredibly rare. Laura glanced at the longbow in her hand. It was still a blank piece of equipment, devoid of any magical properties, and completely incomparable to the bow she was using. Or maybe high-level equipment doesn't drop on normal difficulty. That seems possible. Although this world currently looked largely identical to the Diablo game, some differences weren't surprising. After all, there was no requirement to completely copy the game's settings. In that case, does the Heraldric Cube also have 3 tiers, high, medium, and low? That's not impossible. David grinned speechlessly. Ever since he decided to clear normal difficulty, he'd wanted to get the Heraldric Cube quickly. He felt it would be a great aid to his alchemy skills. Now, it seemed he'd have to wait until hell difficulty to get the real Heraldric Cube. While the two chatted, Helen, Gwen, and Eva huddled together, chatting about something. David then noticed the women retreat to a corner. When they reappeared, their attire had changed significantly. Eva had shed her heavy armor for a lighter outfit, while Helen had donned full body armor, though her weapons remained unchanged. Gwen surprised David the most. While she hadn't changed her armor, she had a pair of short blades tucked into her waistband. Judging by her stance, could she be tempted into close combat? Continuous combat changes a person's mentality, Laura observed. Gwen's choice wasn't surprising, she'd experienced this firsthand. Gwen is a strong woman. She won't be content to hide behind everyone forever. This was good news for Gwen. With hard work, she could gain more from Wintertown and David than simply a romantic relationship. It's good news for you, too. Laura glanced at David beside her. The more good things Gwen could gain from Wintertown, the more she'd become attached to him. After all, by then, it wouldn't be as simple as a simple breakup. Was this all part of your plan? Laura looked up at the sky, pretending she hadn't heard. Seeing she wasn't willing to talk, David didn't press the issue. The makeshift team continued on to their next mission objective. According to David's plan, defeating Andriel wasn't necessary for him today. His biggest goal was to retrieve the blacksmith Charcy's hammer. He remembered that finding the hammer would grant him the opportunity to enchant his own equipment. He wanted to see if he could use this on his own equipment. What kind of stats would he gain if he succeeded? David quickly found the answers to these questions. He tested it with his own hunting bow. With Charcy's enchantment, it became a magical item, granting it increased attack power. But that was all. On normal difficulty, it's really hard to get anything good. Unwilling to give up, David finally went to kill Andriel once more. This time, David deliberately let Gwen deliver the finishing blow, hoping to give her some experience. Unexpectedly, as Andriel, slain by Gwen, fell, a flash of golden light flashed, and then a seemingly ordinary piece of black leather, radiating golden light, lay quietly on the ground. The women glanced at David simultaneously. They suddenly realized that the real reason for killing so many people today and getting nothing wasn't the low drop rate in this dungeon world. Chapter 245 Winter Education Program. David felt a little embarrassed, vaguely recalling the terror of being dominated by the Murlocs in Menethil Harbor. However, he was much thicker-skinned now, acting calmly as if nothing had happened. He walked directly to the piece of black leather and picked it up. He couldn't tell what it was. It didn't seem like equipment, more like raw material. I guess that's the biggest difference from the original game. The dropped items didn't follow the in-game settings. The black leather was pulsing with energy, faintly exuding a hellish aura similar to Andriel's. David couldn't see the item's specific properties, but he was certain it was a rare and valuable item. Isn't this the first item with properties we've seen? David and his group cleared almost the entire first zone. The drops were all ordinary equipment, with the only magical equipment obtained by Charcy using the hammer enchantment. What's the use of this thing? Several people gathered to examine it. Helen looked it up and down. It looked like just a piece of leather, but it was of good quality. Maybe you can make it into clothes or shoes. Yeah, that's a good idea. Let Gwen decide what to make it into. David handed the leather to Gwen. This thing was something Gwen had earned, so no one would object to sharing it with her. Just give it to me. Gwen didn't think she had killed Andriel alone. Without David and Laura's help, she would still be in the previous quest areas, diligently killing monsters and leveling up. In this situation, she felt a little embarrassed to have the loot all to herself. Keep it. Anyway, we'll be going to the dungeon frequently soon, so there should be a lot of good stuff later. As for the leather, perhaps it could be made into some equipment for Gwen to use first. Hearing David's words, Gwen didn't hesitate and began to think about what the leather could be made into. Leather armor? Vest? Jacket? Leather boots? Or, leather coat? Leather pants? Leather skirt? Gwen could take her time to think about it. After killing Andriel and completing the first map, David led the others out of the dungeon instead of heading to Lugoin. They were grinding dungeons for training, not actually saving the world. So there was no need to rush to the next map. After a period of continuous fighting, newbies like Gwen, Eva, and Helen needed some time to rest and recuperate. Rest well. The next dungeon run won't be until at least a few days. These few days allowed the others to digest their increased strength, while David went out to see if there was anything he had missed. After a few days of rest, David led the women into the dungeon again, quickly completing the storyline and using the opportunity to clear demons as training. Helen and Eva continued to steadily improve their strength, while Gwen's progress was more pronounced. Besides mastering firearms and other weapons, Gwen had also learned to fight with short swords, daggers, and one-handed swords, and even displayed some talent in hand-to-hand combat. As long as they continued this way, by the time David cleared normal difficulty, they should all have gained considerable strength, at least enough to protect themselves. At this point, even without David and Laura's protection, they would have more than enough strength to tackle dungeons on their own. As long as they returned to complete their individual quests, their strength would be further increased, and by then, clearing normal difficulty on their own would be no problem. With things on track, David began to focus on other matters, such as the education issue he had initially considered. Wintertown had absorbed a large number of people from Snowforest Castle and would receive even more from Iron Tree Castle. With this round of harvest, Wintertown's population had doubled. The effectiveness of the Tiran Kingdom's forced population relocation remained unclear, but David felt that after these operations, Wintertown's population exceeding 10,000 should be within reach. With a growing population, established infrastructure, and steadily improving military strength, it was time to consider more. David pondered for a while, but couldn't come up with a solid solution. Finally, He called everyone together for a meeting to discuss the issue. Education. Tony, who was working on the first test model of a new rifle, was initially annoyed when David called him over, but when he heard it was such a crucial matter, he swallowed his frustration. Everyone was present today. Not only was Steve there, but even Leon happened to be in Wintertown. Upon hearing David's question, the elite agent was speechless. He couldn't offer any reliable advice on such a matter. Perhaps, we don't need to pursue an overly elaborate education system at the outset. A long silence fell, until it was broken by Kesilius, a Kamartaj mage studying abroad in Wintertown. I think Wintertown's current goal isn't to cultivate top-tier intellectuals, but rather to eradicate illiteracy. You're right. We shouldn't set our sights too high right away. Wintertown's illiteracy rate was originally low. That was because the majority of its inhabitants were craftsmen from Azeroth, who already possessed some literacy. Upon arriving in Wintertown, they were forced to learn the Bronian language in order to survive in this world, a kind of forced literacy. However, with the influx of more and more local civilians, the illiteracy rate skyrocketed. Only a small minority could read, and even then, not many. Then the next question is, how do we solve the problem of teachers? Everyone looked at each other. Seeing no one had any suggestions, Edwin Van Cleef spoke up. After the masters distributed houses and land to the artisans, some of them have relatively little time to spare. They can serve as teachers, while complex knowledge couldn't be taught, simple literacy wasn't a problem. Besides, the artisans who had learned well were senior craftsmen who knew how to teach. That should be enough. The discussion continued, and after half a day of deliberation, a rough plan was finally agreed upon. During the winter farming off-season, Wintertown would provide compulsory education for all residents. This education would consist of two parts. First, all young people aged 7 to 18 within the Wintertown territory would be required to attend school. This was mandatory, no one could refuse admission. During their studies, the school would provide students with ample clothing and food, which would alleviate the pressure on parents in the territory to raise their children. Currently, the program was tentatively planned to be 6 years, with only basic liberal arts, basic mathematics, and physical education courses confirmed. Basic liberal arts courses include the Bronian Common Language, history, and moral education, so building up a 6-year curriculum shouldn't be difficult. Physical education is more like basic military training, and David is even considering stationing a group of Holy Light priests at the school. Whether new courses will be added in the future will depend on the situation. David's goal is that graduates of 6 years of compulsory education must be able to converse, read, and write fluently in the Bronian Common Language, perform addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and meet the physical requirements for recruiting new members for the Order of Winter. Considering the current situation within the territory, this basic academy will enroll all eligible young people and divide them into age groups. No grading will be required for now, everyone will be in the first grade. Each grade will likely have only one class. If no students are enrolled in a particular year, or only 1 or 2 are, a decision will be made based on the situation. The second part of the announcement is for adults within the territory. Wintertown will offer literacy classes specifically for all civilians within the territory, and any citizen of Wintertown is welcome to enroll. This literacy course is also free, and basic supplies, including textbooks, are provided upon registration. Compared to elementary school students, it only lacks benefits like meals. Classes are scheduled at various times, allowing students to choose a time that suits them. The curriculum is the same as the elementary school curriculum, with similar requirements. Graduation is more flexible. As long as you complete the course and pass the corresponding assessment with a sufficient score, you can receive a diploma. What if no one signs up? Gareth had been silent all day, seemingly unable to speak in the education field. Only now did he ask, if the common people have no enthusiasm for the program, can the program continue? Even if no one signs up, the program will continue until there are no more illiterate people in Wintertown. David felt that when that day came, the literacy class might just become something like an adult night school or cram school. And what about the common people who don't want to study? Sooner or later, they'll be eliminated by their own children, or by other people's children, and the resources that were once theirs will be taken away. As a lord, although David is responsible for all his subjects, he will certainly not pay too much attention to those who are stagnant. Instead, he will devote more attention and high-quality resources to those who are more worthy of investment, because these people will bring him more returns. This kind of differential treatment is inevitable. That's roughly it. Just do it. As for the person in charge, David found that he had to appoint an education officer, otherwise it would be easy to cause trouble if there was no one who was really responsible for so many things. Looking at the people present, David looked back and forth for a long time, but he didn't find anyone who was suitable to be in charge of the education work in Winter Town. In the end, he could only throw the burden to the old hunter Addis, whom he trusted. Addis will be the education officer of Winter Town. Chapter 246 The Diplomatic Mission from the Capital. Addis hadn't wanted to be an education officer, but he also realized that David didn't have anyone suitable to fill the position, so he had no choice but to take over. After the meeting ended and everyone dispersed, Addis stayed behind and went to the lounge with David. Although they were discussing business, David didn't join Addis in the office. Instead, he sat in the lounge and had Helen pour a cup of hot tea for him and Addis. Slurp, he took a sip of the hot tea, the fragrant and bitter flavor filling his nose and mouth. Influenced by David over the past 2 years, Addis had also come to like this kind of tea without any additives. How unpredictable things are. Looking back, Addis had simply wanted to adopt a child. The child didn't need to be anything great. As long as he could raise and teach him how to be a qualified hunter, show a little gratitude, and provide for his old age and death, he would be satisfied. He had never imagined that the situation would turn out like this. When he first heard that David had become the village chief, he was already in disbelief. Later, David became a baron, a true noble. Addis even wondered if he was already dead, and that everything he was experiencing was just a dream, ready to vanish at any moment. He hadn't imagined how long he'd been a baron, and now he was about to become an earl. Living in Wintertown, he'd witnessed up close how Winter Village became Wintertown, and soon, Winter City. The mystical changes and the magical happenings in the city all felt surreal. However, after gradually getting used to it, Addis hoped David would continue to improve and make the city more prosperous. He had grown to love it and didn't want it to disappear. Consequently, he felt immense pressure to accept David's appointment. "I can only help you for a while. You'd better find a professional official as soon as possible." Addis didn't want his own incompetence to hinder David's territory's development. Whether it's from the capital or some other strange place, such talent isn't easy to find, and even if we do find one, they might not be suitable for Winter Town. They don't know the place as well as you do. Addis had lived here since the Winter Village days and had witnessed every change. Besides, being an education officer isn't that difficult. As long as you follow the plan step by step, there won't be any problems. David explained to Addis the tasks that needed to be completed in the plan, and how appropriate intimidation and violence could be used to ensure completion, reassuring the old hunter. "Even if you say so, I'm afraid my old arms and legs won't last many more years. Haven't you eaten the golden apple? And there's also the holy light. Your health won't deteriorate in a few decades, with the protection of extraordinary powers, especially the holy light. As long as he didn't die in battle, there was no need to worry about his health." Moreover, David didn't know how far his territory would develop in a few decades. What bizarre abilities would he possess? Perhaps by then, in addition to various mystical powers, he'd also mastered various scientific enhancement techniques. Everyone in the territory would be enhanced, their lifespans elevated by 1, or even several, levels. That wouldn't be impossible. By then, children living hundreds of years old might no longer be a meme or a joke. This wasn't a particularly ambitious goal. The Marvel Cinematic Universe actually had relevant technology, and advanced civilizations, including the Kree Empire, possess similar technology. If the Kree Empire proved difficult to deal with, they could look for similar technology on Xander or other planets. Addis remained silent. He knew his health was improving, and he knew that as his strength grew, his lifespan would increase. But he'd always assumed he was already quite old when he learned these things, and even if it did, it would only add a decade or 8. He'd never imagined it would extend to dozens or even centuries. Glancing at David, he realized he wasn't kidding, and sighed again. As one gets older, one tends to lament, and at the same time, one tends to worry about the trivialities of the younger generation. For example, what are you going to do with Princess Sophia? Let it be. Seeing a hint of worry on Addis's face, David went out of his way to explain, reassuring him not to worry. Judging from the current situation, even if he explicitly rejected the marriage, His Majesty wouldn't blame him. There was no question of a direct fallout. Even if they did, Wintertown was more than capable of withstanding the wrath of the Kingdom of Tiran. At most, Future development plans would have to be redesigned. Just be aware of this. Don't worry. Addis took the last sip of his tea, left Glamorgan Castle, and began busying himself with Winter's education. David continued with his own tasks, daily monitoring of changes within the territory, the progress of various tasks, and any difficulties encountered with any of the projects. He would also explore dungeons with the girls. Half a month later, David, accompanied by Jack Krauser and several winter knights, arrived at Snowfield Castle to welcome the royal capital delegation. Under normal circumstances, David, as Lord of Winter, wouldn't have needed to travel to Snowfort to greet the delegation, even though Snowfort had officially been placed under David's jurisdiction. However, this time, the royal capital delegation was also tasked with assessing the orc threat, and Princess Sophia was also aboard. Out of respect for the delegation and the Tiran royal family, David specifically brought his men to Snowfort, a border town currently under the jurisdiction of the Lord of Glamorgan, to welcome the kingdom delegation led by Earl Sutton Stewart. Congratulations. After going through the usual formalities, Earl Sutton Stewart handed David the letter of appointment. After completing the relatively simple ascension ceremony on behalf of the king, Sutton Stewart resumed his usual unassuming demeanor. While I knew you wouldn't stop at Baron, I didn't expect you'd be promoted to Earl so quickly. At this rate, it won't be long before I'll be the first to greet you. Given Earl Sutton Stewart's title and special status, he'd have to be at least a powerful duke to initiate a meeting and greet him. Such a thing. David made a face as if you were exaggerating, but Sutton Stewart could sense the confidence in his expression and tone. It was clear that David believed that day would come sooner or later. Sutton, who had originally been joking and offering a subtle compliment, was at a loss for words when he noticed this. He paused for a second before returning to the main point. This is Her Royal Highness Princess Sophia. It's a pleasure to meet you, Your Highness. It's a pleasure to see you again, Lord Glamorgan. And on the northern plains, Princess Sophia looked a bit more mature than when they met last year. Her still chubby face wore a bright, radiant smile, still full of childlike innocence. And it's winter, so it doesn't feel that cold. David smiled silently. He wouldn't tell the princess. If you can, take that necklace off your neck and see if you're cold. He and the princess weren't that familiar yet. Lord Sutton Stewart wouldn't let David and Princess Sophia stand at the gates of Snowfield Castle, exposed to the biting cold wind, to cultivate a relationship. It wasn't that he cared about the guards following him, but such behavior was unsightly and undermined the royal dignity. Before we chat, perhaps we could ask Lord Glamorgan to give us a good tour of the fortress. Of course, the group turned and headed inside Snowforest. Only then did Earl Sutton Stewart have time to survey his surroundings and the heavily armored knights who had accompanied David. The winter knights, clad in blizzard power armor, looked tall, imposing, and intimidating. From the moment they appeared, the guards from the capital kept scrutinizing them. As they turned and began to walk, the heavy thud of their footsteps startled everyone. From the sound, they could tell the armor was heavy. The knight's ability to move so freely in such heavy armor meant either incredible strength or the armor itself was enchanted. Either way, it meant Wintertown. It would officially be renamed Winter City, signifying the formidable combat capabilities of the Knights of Winter City. Initially, these guards hadn't taken the prospect of encountering orcs on the northern plains seriously. The guards accompanying the delegation on the northern plains, tasked with protecting Earl Sutton Stewart and Princess Sophia, were all from the kingdom's elite Tiran knights and royal guards. They felt that a foreign race defeated by the soldiers of a remote, rural lord in Winter City was no real enemy worth worrying about. Furthermore, one of the royal guards had previously visited Wintertown, the very knight who had escorted David back. This knight's description had made everyone realize just how remote and backward Winter City was. If those orcs couldn't even defeat soldiers from such a place, how could they possibly be taken seriously by these elite forces? It wasn't until this moment, upon meeting the actual winter knights, that they began to doubt their judgment and wondered how such a powerful knightly order could exist in Winter City. As they advanced, the delegation witnessed more and more remarkable things. The seemingly ordinary snow castle on the outside held so many awe-inspiring features within. The flat, wide, and clean roads, along with the beautiful, clearly defined buildings, made them wonder if they had truly arrived in the remote northern plains, instead of a bustling southern trading town. Also, are those tall metal giants waving? Are these puppets so flexible? Chapter 247 Earl Stewart's Mission. After Snowburg became David's territory, Its residents and former garrison were relocated to Wintertown. Diggers then moved into Snowburg to rebuild what was now Winter City's border outpost. The renovation focused on the city's interior, including a relatively small power plant, powered by crystal ore, small waste and sewage treatment plants, and basic infrastructure such as electricity, water, and sewage. Next came the paving of roads to ensure the transformers from Cybertron could move freely within Snowburg, followed by the construction of various buildings. The buildings currently completed primarily consisted of military barracks. Due to Snowburg's unique circumstances, with no civilians living there, all facilities were dedicated to military purposes. Consequently, the interior of the renovated Snowburg was remarkably cold and stoic, exuding a solemn and austere atmosphere. Earl Sutton Stewart took a quick look and observed that Snowburg lacked any ordinary residents. The few who were not wearing armor seemed to be soldiers. Is there no common people or artisans in Snowfort? No, David saw no need to hide these things. When Sutton Stewart brought a large group to Winter City, he knew that the wonders of Winter City would soon be known to the Kingdom of Tiran. Currently, Snowfort is Winter City's outermost line of defense and is very close to the orcs, so it has been converted into a purely military facility. In a sense, he also wanted to showcase his territory. That would probably raise many questions for King Abelson, but until those questions were answered, he would be unlikely to do anything about Winter City. David could then develop quietly for a while. As Sutton listened to David's explanation, he realized that Winter City had completely renovated Snowfort. Aside from the walls and the name, nothing remained of the original Snowfort. Even the building they entered was newly constructed. The original fortress, barely constructed, had been demolished. This new structure, more closely resembling a winter's style, might appear less fortified, but it would be far more comfortable. Earl Sutton Stewart and Princess Sophia were allowed to rest here, while the delegation's guards were led to the barracks. The barracks at Snowfrest Castle were large and comfortable. Since Winter City's current number of soldiers was relatively small, there were plenty of spare rooms to accommodate the guards. Upon entering the barracks, the guards felt a rush of warm air and suddenly realized they might not have to worry about freezing in this icy land. These soldiers in Winter City have living conditions even better than the barracks at the Tiran Knights base. The Tiran Knights were all from well-off families, and they would undoubtedly be dissatisfied if their living conditions were too poor. As the Tiran Kingdom's strongest military force, the Tiran Knights enjoyed top-tier treatment. Even the quarters allocated to ordinary knights were no worse than standard inn rooms. But only the Tiran Knights could enjoy such treatment. No other troops within the Tiran Kingdom enjoyed such generous benefits. Unexpectedly, today, on the frigid frontier of the Tiran Kingdom, the Tiran Knights encountered troops whose accommodations were just as good as theirs. Look at the heavy armor on those guys. The Earl of Glamorgan is generous with his soldiers. Maintaining a strong army costs a fortune. And many lords are reluctant to spend large sums on soldiers, especially on seemingly unnecessary expenses like this. Considering that the Earl of Winter City recently repelled the orcs, it seems the Earl made a very good choice. Speaking of orcs, I'm beginning to wonder what those so-called orcs actually look like. The guards were discussing the orcs, and Sutton Stewart was also discussing them with David. He had come to the Northern Plains on a mission to gather military intelligence. He had to determine the extent of the threat the orcs posed to the Tiran Kingdom and report in detail to His Majesty upon his return. Orcs, David relayed all the information he knew about them. Sutton initially dismissed them. Like most people in the kingdom, he thought, how could a group of underdogs defeated by the Winter Lords possibly pose a threat to the mighty Kingdom of Tiran? Winter City was just a small border town with a small population, so its military strength couldn't be that strong. To be defeated by the Winter Lords, how weak must the orcs be? They wondered how useless the soldiers of Iron Tree Keep were. They couldn't even withstand a bunch of weaklings. And yet, they had to ask the capital for help. Now, having personally arrived at Snowfort, Sutton Stewart met David's heavily armored knights, Winter Knights in power armor, witnessed the towering metal golems, and witnessed a vast infrastructure that had rapidly transformed Snowfort into a purely military facility. Sutton Stewart realized that the orcs might not be as weak as they had initially assumed. Iron Tree Keep's inability to withstand the orcs' attack wasn't due to its own weakness. It was Winter City's strength, far greater than anyone had imagined. David's description of the orcs confirmed Sutton's earlier assessment. Capable of fighting against elite knights, with tall and sturdy builds, and in astonishing numbers, A single orc's combat power was already considerable, capable of holding its own against a highly trained elite soldier. But even more formidable was their sheer numbers. SYNOPSIS Castle had previously been attacked by 5,000 orcs, and that wasn't even their full strength. Currently, there are large numbers of orcs scattered across the eastern part of the northern plains. Exact numbers are difficult to determine, as these orcs have arrived from even further afield, and they appear to be continuously migrating into this region. David had considered personally scouting the east to discover where these orcs were coming from. However, after confirming the existence of a powerful deity and the decisive destruction of Pretender 1, he temporarily abandoned the plan. If he flew directly over, would he be killed by the deity, just like Pretender 1? Even the mere attention he'd received wouldn't bode well for him. Should we maintain our current state, improve our strength, and observe if there are any unusual changes among the orcs? According to the Dark Elf priest he met earlier, the goddess of night provided significant assistance when the Dark Elves invaded Brunia. Later, when humans entered Brunia, they also enjoyed the protection of the god of war and the goddess of harvest. It doesn't make sense that the orcs are completely powerless here. It means they clearly have a bigger hidden weapon they haven't yet deployed. He hadn't shared this unconfirmed information with Sutton Stewart. But even sharing the current information with the Earl had already made him realize the gravity of the situation. The orcs, with their vast numbers and impressive combat capabilities, were indeed a formidable threat. After silently contemplating the northern plains and the surrounding terrain, Earl Sutton Stewart wondered if the orcs could potentially threaten the interior of the Kingdom of Tiran from other routes. Fortunately, unless the orcs could cross the Tiran Mountains, they would have to successfully defeat Winter City and Iron Tree Keep before they could threaten the core territory of Tiran. He suddenly remembered some information that had been circulating recently about the Thordorimer Empire. Their eastern region had been experiencing unrest and frequent attacks in the past 2 years. When the Kingdom of Tiran received this news, it had been treated as a source of excitement and amusement. Now, could it be that orcs were actually the ones harassing the Thordorimer Empire's coastline? Saturn sorted out the various pieces of information in his mind, taking note of them. He then inquired about the situation at SYNOPSIS and expressed a desire to see its current defenses. If Winter City needs us, the king will dispatch the Tiran Knights to garrison SYNOPSIS. Not necessary at this time. David didn't want his hard-won fortress to be inexplicably seized by the Tiran Knights. If the Tiran Knights were stationed there, would SYNOPSIS still be considered his territory? Would the knights obey him or the king directly? The answer was obvious. After all, even David himself was loyal to His Majesty, and the Tiran Knights couldn't ignore the king's orders and follow the earls. After leaving the room, Sutton followed David up the city wall. He noticed that there were always giant metal golems roaming around near the walls, apparently on guard and patrol. I've been wanting to ask this for a while now. What, are these metal golems made using alchemy? No, David said, greeting lightning nearby. They're Cybertronians, a very unique race. Sutton had never imagined that the metal golems he had always thought of were actually a unique life form, a race in their own right. So, these massive metal giants, called Cybertronians, had become citizens of Winterfell? Could it be that these Cybertronians were the true reason for Winterfell's strength? Sutton felt he might have guessed the truth, and in a sense, his guess wasn't wrong. The Earl also keenly sensed that David seemed to be sharing this information deliberately, apparently intending to explain to the king the secret of Winterfell's strength through his report. Why? Perhaps to show loyalty? To allay the king's suspicions? Regardless of his reasoning, Sutton Stewart felt that his mission would be easier to accomplish. Besides investigating the orcs, he also had to understand the situation in Winterfell. He also needed to thoroughly investigate the so-called Flying Dragon. Chapter 248 Winter City. Before setting off, Sutton had thought he might need some sleight of hand to gather sufficient information. To his surprise, David had no intention of hiding anything and quickly introduced him to Winter City's dragons. Cybertronians possess the ability to transform, he said, transforming into giant metal birds or some form of swift, untethered vehicle. These Cybertronians earned the nickname Transformers. Sutton and Princess Sophia experienced the Transformers' transformation into vehicles firsthand on their way from SYNOPSIS to Winter City. Due to road conditions, several of the group rode in a large truck transformed by Optimus Prime, while the delegation's guards rode in transport trucks used by the Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment. Using the transportation provided by Winter City, the delegation arrived in Winter City much more quickly. "Is this your territory?" Winter City, yes. From Optimus Prime's cab, Sophia had a high enough vantage point to see the beautiful city ahead. No city walls, no, the city's development is so rapid, so they haven't built any. Sutton hadn't said much since he'd settled into Optimus Prime's cockpit, simply surveying the interior. He'd noticed a lot. This so-called truck could be driven by a human. This meant there seemed to be a prototype for the vehicles these transformers could transform into. He didn't know at this point that the truck behind him wasn't a transformer. This seemed to suggest that something like a truck could be created through alchemy or other means. Even if it couldn't transform into a massive metal giant, it would still be incredibly convenient, bringing about earth-shattering changes to the entire kingdom. Extending his thinking, wouldn't something like that be true for airplanes? Sutton regretted not including experts in alchemy, magic, and engineering in the delegation. Perhaps they could make a more accurate assessment. His mind was preoccupied with various matters, and he didn't interrupt Sophia and David's conversation until Winter City came into view. Sophia questioned David about its lack of walls, drawing his attention away from the truck and back to the city. Gazing at the city of countless beautiful houses in the distance, Sutton took in the surroundings of Winter City. Winter City's location was ideal, both in terms of scenery and geography. Forests to the north, a great river to the west, and plains to the southeast. It was a perfect place to live, no matter how you looked at it. Its only drawback was the lack of strategic points for defense. In this situation, a wall would be far more effective than a town built on strategic terrain. Yet David hadn't built a wall. Could it be that David, a country lord of humble origins, didn't understand the importance of a wall? He might have thought so before, but not now. The fact that David had built such a sophisticated and beautiful town and assembled the powerful Knights of Winter in just 1 year showed that he was a formidable lord. The only explanation for such a formidable lord not building a wall was that he saw no need. He was confident that his Winter City could not be attacked. As the team entered Winter City, Sutton noticed something being built on a vacant lot, led by several purple and green Cybertronians. What's being built there? Winter City's first school. Winter City had a large expanse of open space, so David chose this area as the school site. After Digger completed the renovation of Snow Forest, he returned to Wintertown to build the school. Once the entire project was complete, the craftsman, who had recently been idle, would move in to complete the interior decoration. Meanwhile, Winter City's carpenters were crafting tables, chairs, and other equipment for the school. Leonard and Howard had taken time to modify a batch of printing equipment. In the future, all books used in Winter City, including textbooks, could be printed locally, eliminating the need for Laura to produce and transport them from her world. Speaking of this, David realized that he could collect books from various worlds, translate them into the common language of Brunnian, and then print them for storage in the Winter City Public Library. Deciding to bring this up with Weatherby sometime, David continued to introduce Winter Academy to Sutton and Sophia. So, this is an academy for all citizens of Winter City? Nobles and commoners alike. Sutton's first reaction wasn't that David, the Lord, possessed noble sentiments, but rather that it seemed a bit inappropriate. As a true noble, born into a wealthy family, he didn't believe commoners needed an education. What good would that entail? Ordinary people only needed to learn to work, farm, and occasionally support the knights with weapons. Learning knowledge, would commoners, with more knowledge, still be willing to live a hard life? If commoners refused to do the hard labor, who would farm the land? Who would do the dirty work? Various thoughts flashed through Sutton's mind, but he didn't speak up to remind David. He didn't believe David hadn't thought of these things, but he did it anyway, proving that David and he weren't on the same page. Or perhaps, what greater benefit was there that compelled David to do this? What's the reason? Sutton had previously thought his mission would be easy, but now it seemed more problems were emerging. As the convoy pulled up to the Winter Hotel, Princess Sophia and her guards were all accommodated within the hotel. Comfortable, upscale rooms had been prepared in advance, and to prevent these country bumpkins from the royal city from misusing the modern amenities and causing trouble, a team of maids and servants had been specially arranged. Princess Sophia and Earl Sutton Stewart brought their own servants, and the Winter City maids and servants would teach them how to use the various facilities and could call on them for assistance when necessary. Your Highness and Lord Stewart, please rest well today. The various tours and welcoming events have been scheduled for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Thank you, Lord Glamorgan. After a perfectly polite farewell, David left the Winter Hotel's upscale accommodations and crossed a broad road back to his own castle. Glamorgan. Important figures from Winter City were gathered in the conference room awaiting his arrival. After David placed the appointment letter down, officially declaring Wintertown to be Winter City and the entire Northern Plains his de jure territory, everyone in the office smiled. While accurate information had been known before, it wasn't confirmed until now. With David's elevated status, everyone else's status actually rose accordingly. After all, the administrator of a town and the official governing the entire Northern Plains couldn't be compared. Congratulations, congratulations, Tony Stark applauded David vigorously. Then asked the question that concerned him most, have you seen any changes to your ability? Everyone present was one of the family, even Gareth and Floyd, now part of the inner circle, had some understanding of the Lord's mysterious powers. It was impossible not to be curious. Strange individuals appeared in winter every now and then. Ordinary people didn't care where these people came from, but how could the Supreme Commander and Deputy Commander of the Winter Army not be concerned? Especially with more frequent contact with Raynor, Liadrin, and the others, he'd been able to pick up bits of information, and anyone with a sound mind could discern the truth. So, he'd long since stopped shying away from them. David, observing Tony's expression, knew his primary concern was whether he could travel relatively freely between the two worlds. He didn't want to constantly be looking for Steve, as if it would seem like they had some strange relationship. I need some time to test the specific changes. The downside of his cheat code was that he had to figure out any abilities on his own. Even when new features were upgraded, there were no prompts, leaving him on his own. He figured it out, since he had nothing else to do right now. He chatted with everyone for a while, then asked them to return to their work. Leonard and the others would conduct some more tests on the crystal ore to see if there had been any recent changes. Anything else? Seems nothing. He gave instructions, simply asking everyone to focus on their tasks. He might have to test anything else himself. For example, could he freely travel to other worlds? Staring at Tony beside him for a moment, David, his mind racing to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, wandered back and forth along the streets near Fort Glamorgan, but after a while, he still hadn't crossed over. Tony watched from the sidelines, realizing what David was testing, and then he began to wander around as well. The two of them wandered around like idiots for a while, but in the end, they remained on the broad road in front of Fort Glamorgan, with no sign of crossing over at all. Stop wandering around, I'm feeling dizzy. Tony stopped and beckoned David to stop. His physical fitness wasn't as good as David's, and while he wouldn't be exhausted after just a short walk, there was no need to torture himself like that. David paused and sighed helplessly. It seemed he needed to work harder to level up if he wanted to freely travel to other worlds. Just as he was thinking this, a shadowy figure suddenly appeared before him. It seemed like a newcomer. However, to David's surprise, this sudden appearance wasn't a newcomer, but Jaina Proudmoore. Huh? What's going on? Chapter 249, New Functions of Goldfinger. The Jaina Proudmoore before them wasn't some new Jaina, it was the Jaina they knew, currently serving as Dalaran's diplomat to Winterfell. Diplomats like Jaina and Sylvanus would periodically return to their own worlds to report on developments. Wintertown had been upgraded to Winterfell, Baron Glamorgan had been elevated to Earl of Glamorgan, and his domains had expanded immeasurably. These were all matters that needed to be reported. However, Sylvanus would return directly to Winterfell after reporting. She had figured out that she didn't want to become the queen of the High Elf Kingdom, so there was no point getting involved in such affairs. She would stay in Winterfell, serving as a diplomat. Once Keylthus became king and his status and reputation were established, she could continue to serve as a ranger general. High elves lived long lives anyway, so there was no need for her to dwell on these brief 10 years. Jaina's situation was different. She was a disciple of Archmage Antonidas. Due to various changes, Dalaran was spared the Scourge invasion, and the city remained intact in its original location. Many of Dalaran's mages were also alive and well, remaining a major force in Azeroth. Jaina was also a princess of Kultiris, so she had a lot of travel to do whenever she returned. Even with teleportation spells, she still spent a considerable amount of time attending to various matters. In her spare moments, she would ponder the differences between the two worlds and how to use her abilities to freely travel between them. This was exactly what happened this time. After finishing her various tasks and preparing to travel to Lordaeron to find Fordring, Jaina was contemplating how to use her magic to reach Winter City when she suddenly arrived there. After listening to Jaina's description, David was speechless. Jaina's words were almost incomplete. She herself had no idea how she had achieved this, but from her description, it seemed as if she had acquired abilities similar to those of Fordring and his companions. Try a few more times to see if you can truly travel back and forth freely. Yes, Jaina was also concerned about this matter. Although she still didn't understand the underlying principles, possessing this ability would make her research much easier. Jaina tried it several times in front of David, proving that she could truly travel freely between the two worlds. Seeing this, Tony also began to try, but just as before, he couldn't return to his own world at will. What's going on? Tony pondered quietly for a few seconds. When Jaina returned, he asked her a few questions, such as whether she experienced any energy fluctuations or mana loss when she completed the journey. After receiving a negative answer, Tony began to sort through the various information about the two people, looking for any discrepancies. His mind raced, and he quickly came across a key difference, one related to Winterfell. Identity. It wasn't just Tony who had this idea, David and Jaina also had it in mind. Compared to Jaina, a diplomat stationed in Winterfell, Tony had no official identity in Winterfell. To verify this hypothesis, the three of them immediately sought out Raynor, Sylvanus, Medivh, and the others for testing. This was quickly confirmed. Those with diplomatic status, like Raynor and Sylvanus, gained the ability to travel freely between the two worlds. However, those purely visiting, like Medivh, were denied the ability to do so. The group then went to Jack Krauser and Sheldon. Jack Krauser, with his official status as a firearms instructor and Knight of the Order of Winter, also gained the ability to travel freely. Howard and Sheldon, among others, held official statuses as alchemists, engineers, and scientific advisors within the Winter Alchemy Workshop. Sheldon had also immediately joined the Winter Household Register and now also gained the ability to travel freely. Penny, on the other hand, although she had property in Winter City, lacked a Winter Household Register and held no official position, so she still needed Leonard to accompany her back and forth. So, I'm just an illegal resident in Winter City. Penny had previously not cared much about whether or not she had a Winter City household register. After all, in this world, it didn't seem to matter to her. Now, things were different. Those with status and household registers had gained superpowers, making her seem like an outsider, and from the perspective of household register, she was indeed an outsider. I want to apply for naturalization, Penny declared her intention to become a Winterborn. From then on, she would be a true citizen of Winter City, dying and being buried there, becoming a Winter City ghost. Naturalization wasn't a big deal. David went straight to Weatherby Swan and registered Penny on the spot, filing her personal information. After completing these procedures, David had Penny take an immediate test to see if she had gained the ability to freely travel between the two worlds. Surprisingly, even after obtaining Winter City citizenship, Penny still didn't gain the ability to freely travel between the two worlds, which frustrated her. Without further ado, David immediately gave Penny the title of assistant to the ceremonial officer, granting her the ability to travel between the two worlds. Looks like it's more than just Winter City citizenship. Through a series of tests, he had learned that official positions in Winter City could grant these extra-dimensional beings the ability to travel between the two worlds. While some restrictions remained, Winter City would be able to communicate more easily with other worlds. With this change, David wondered if issuing visas or something similar could help him recruit more talent across dimensions. Would recruiting civilians also become easier and faster? With a visa or proof of entry to Winter City, these people could come directly to Winter City, which would undoubtedly be much more efficient than relying on specific contacts to travel back and forth. If this method worked, perhaps a facility similar to immigration and customs could be built, acting as an interdimensional teleportation array. David was about to test everything when he turned around and saw Tony staring at him eagerly. What? Ahem. Tony cleared his throat. What do you think of me becoming Winter City's chief scientific advisor? Sure, Tony hadn't wanted any title within Winter City. He felt it would offer more freedom, allowing him to come and go as he pleased, and less entangled with Winter City. But in this situation, Tony felt he had to hold the title, perhaps even naturalize and become a full-fledged resident of Winterfell. Or maybe you could give me a title or something. What? You want to swear allegiance to me? Tony's heart sank at this, and he decisively skipped the subject. Only asking David for the position of chief scientific advisor and Winterfell's household registration. David then returned to his office and asked Eva to gather the information and household registration of key Winterfell personnel. This information was usually kept close at hand for David to review at any time. Almost as David had given the order, Eva entered with documents in hand. She flipped open the file, revealing the Winterfell household registration divided into several sections. There were folders for locals, non-locals, officials, and civilians. People like Eva and Helen were in separate categories from Tony and Sylvanas. He set the files containing Fording, Eva, and the others aside. These individuals already had the ability to travel freely. Household registration and positions offered no additional benefits. David's primary focus was on checking the information of people like Tony Stark, who had come to Winterfell indirectly and now held significant value to the city. Tony had already been officially inducted and would become Winterfell's chief scientific advisor. Besides Tony, Jack Krauser had long been a member of the Order of Winterfell and had sworn allegiance to David, becoming a knight. Who else was there? Sheldon and the others all had official identities, and Sheldon had also obtained official household registration. In fact, the household registration forms currently used by Winterfell were all based on a model created by Sheldon. Beyond these individuals, the ability to travel freely didn't seem particularly important. Oh, right. I almost forgot about Optimus Prime. David planned to find a time to ask Optimus what position he was slated to take. As for Megatron, he would become the commander of the Cybertron Legion. By the way, what has Optimus been up to lately? Although they had previously returned to Winterfell from Snowfrest on Optimus Prime, the situation wasn't ideal for a chat. If they wanted to inquire about Optimus Prime's recent situation, they had to ask Eva. Seems like he's learning the light with Lyodrin and Ratchet. What? He wants to become the first Cybertron Paladin. With Optimus Prime's personality, he should be able to learn the light quickly. I just wonder if we should give this Cybertron Paladin a set of armor and weapons? While chatting casually with Eva, he took out a piece of ordinary iron and used alchemy to craft an iron token. The token was simple, with the wolf's head emblem of Winterfell on the front and the words "Granted Entry" engraved in the common tongue of Brunnian on the back. He planned to test the token, but as for who should test its effectiveness? Helen. Give this to your father. After explaining the possible effects to Helen, Helen immediately returned to the Kingdom of Sparta to find her father, Tyndareus, and they quickly came to a definitive conclusion. The token did indeed allow anyone to enter Winterfell. With the token, Helen's father, Tyndareus, gained the ability to freely travel to Winterfell. However, after giving it to someone else, he lost this ability. Give this token to your father for safekeeping. If you stay here for a long time, he can use the token to notify you if anything happens over there. Chapter 250 Princess Sophia. With the official formation of the Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment in Winter City, and even Helen's two brothers, Castor and Pollux, arriving for training, the connection between the Kingdom of Sparta and Winter City grew ever closer. David deeply hoped that Sparta would continue to develop steadily, ideally becoming the world's most powerful nation, providing a steady supply of population and high-quality soldiers for Winter City in the future. As for growing tea in Sparta, that was just a side note. After confirming that his own tokens could grant ordinary people access to Winter City, David conducted a simple test to see if the same tokens made by others would have the same effect. He also tested whether tokens made with David's personal authorization and those made without authorization would have the same effect. The tests revealed that only tokens made by David himself could grant access to Winter City. Tokens made by others in Winter City, even those made with David's permission, did not. Well, that means only I can issue these tokens, David said without rushing to create a large number of tokens and then handing a few to each person. He needed time to gather his thoughts, not while Helen was splattering olive oil everywhere and performing a Greek Olympic extravaganza for him. Who gave you that idea? David wasn't particularly knowledgeable about ancient European history, but he did know about the origins of the Olympic Games. One theory was that they were held to commemorate the death of Achilles, meaning that the Olympics came into being after Achilles' death. Helen was young, unmarried, and hadn't eloped with Paris to Troy. Achilles was no longer known in which palace, cross-dressing as a prostitute. So, the Olympics probably didn't exist in her world at this time. Laura. David reached out to smooth the strands of hair clinging to Helen's forehead, his response a bit amusing. This woman was truly desperate, actually going to Laura, her rival, hoping to learn how to win him over quickly. Her method is very effective. Helen lay in David's arms, feeling as if her entire body was falling apart. Even moving a finger was a struggle, but she was deeply satisfied. Her physical fatigue and discomfort had transformed into spiritual satisfaction. David forced himself not to say anything. Helen's figure and appearance, even without all the fancy tricks, would be irresistible to any normal person. He just gave Laura a heart in his heart. As for Helen's sudden anxiety, it was ultimately due to Sophia's arrival. Although the connection between Sparta and Winterfell was growing stronger, Helen was not satisfied with this. She dreamed of becoming David's wife. Previously, she could slowly cultivate this relationship and even thought she had a slight advantage. She could be by David's side for a long time. Then, the king of the Kingdom of Tiran in this world suddenly wanted to marry his daughter to David, which made her feel threatened. In her haste, she ignored everything else and ran to Laura for advice. First, she would take David. She had been skeptical of Laura's suggestion, but after seeing the results, she suddenly understood why she was willing to offer it. She recalled a book she'd read recently, in which the demigod Hercules seduced 49 women in one night, each of whom gave birth to sons. Helen saw David in the same light, but she wondered if he'd conceived a son. If so, did he have a head start? As her thoughts wandered, Helen drifted off into dream. David, watching Helen, a smile on her face, soundly asleep, remained motionless, acting as a human pillow. When daylight dawned, David gently disentangled himself from Helen's entanglements, rose, washed, dressed, preparing his appearance before meeting Princess Sophia and Lord Sutton Stewart. The welcoming ceremony and tours for the princess were scheduled for this afternoon and evening, and all day tomorrow. As Lord of Winterfell, David couldn't miss them. Not only David couldn't be absent, all the high-ranking officials in Winterfell were required to attend the welcome party, which would be held at Glamorgan Castle. However, David had to personally pick up the princess and the earl from the Winter Hotel first. Even if it was just across the street, protocol was imperative. Elias Parker, who had returned with the delegation after a personal trip to the capital, was already waiting outside David's bedroom door. As David finished his preparations and exited the bedroom, he saw his etiquette officer quietly waiting. "Have you taken care of everything?" "Yes, my lord, you'll be living in Winterfell forever from now on." "That's my good fortune, my lord. How are the preparations for the welcome party going?" "Everything is ready." This was the etiquette officer's job. Elias had risen early to oversee every detail, including the venue, the decor, and the food. Some hot dishes would have to wait until the appropriate time, but Elias, knowing Jonah's cooking, wasn't worried about any problems with the food. A large group, including Political Officer Weatherby Swan, Sheriff Elizabeth Swan, Floyd and Jack Crouser of the Winter Knights, and Naval Commander James Norrington, were already waiting in the banquet hall. David was to take Elias, Gareth Stanton, and some of the Winter Knights to pick up Princess Sophia and Earl Sutton Stewart. The car will be Dino. Elias had never met Dino before, as he had only recently arrived in Winter City and happened to be in the capital. However, this didn't prevent him from taking in all the information and choosing the most suitable car. Oh, but Dino's transformation was into a Ferrari sports car. It could only seat two, right? The Earl and Gareth will ride in the second car. While Sutton Stewart was the leader of the delegation, the true protagonist of the mission was Princess Sophia, and everyone knew that. As they walked out of Glamorgan Castle, where the car had already parked, David climbed into Dino's transformed red sports car. "This is such a boring job," Dino complained the moment David entered. He was annoyed that he had to make a special trip across the street for a simple task. "It can't be helped. You're so handsome." "That's true." As the convoy set off, David noticed the Winter Knights on heavy motorcycles leading the way. Looking at them in their ornate ceremonial armor, David thought of those motorcycles that could transform into battle armor. Could they possibly manufacture a batch of similar equipment? The distance was so short that he didn't have time to think about it before the group arrived at the hotel. They'd greet Princess Sophia, pick her up, and get into the sports car, then drive back to Glamorgan Castle. The whole process was incredibly tedious. David thought if he actually married the princess, the daily hassle of seeing her would drive him crazy. Now he could maintain his composure and perfectly display the proper etiquette expected of an earl. The most crucial point was that he didn't have to maintain this state every day. Arriving at the banquet hall, David personally introduced the princess to the key officials of Winterfell. This was standard procedure. The entire welcome reception was unremarkable, except for Sophia's slight surprise at the presence of a female senior official in Winterfell. However, she remained silent throughout the reception, displaying her best self as a princess. After everyone had dispersed, the princess expressed a desire to explore Winterfell. Only when David was alone did she breathe a sigh of relief. Tired? Yes, Sophia glanced at David and winked playfully. You're pretending to be tired, aren't you? This time, the two of them were no longer traveling in the Ferrari transformed by Dino. To give Sophia a better view of Winterfell, they were riding in a pickup truck transformed from metal. Not bad. Are you worried? Sophia stared at David with her big, round eyes, as if she saw through everything. Are you worried that you'll have to live this way every day? Yes. David looked at the princess beside him, whose face still held a hint of childishness. He suddenly realized that this young princess might not be as childish as she appeared. Don't worry. My father and mother don't have all these complicated formalities when they're together. Sophia glanced at David, realizing that these words seemed out of place. Well, I mean, you wouldn't be like this with your close ones, right? No, that's right, Sophia said, her expression a bit like I'm right, but a hint of disappointment was evident on her face. David's response clearly conveyed a message. He already had someone close to him. David's blunt statement was actually a hope that Princess Sophia would back off when faced with difficulties, although His Majesty had publicly announced his intention to marry the princess to the Earl of Glamorgan. If Princess Sophia herself expressed her opposition to the match, it wouldn't be a problem for His Majesty to retract his words. It was the princess who took the initiative to reject the marriage, and it wouldn't affect the royal family's dignity. At most, Earl David would be ridiculed for a while by the other nobles. What troubled David was that Sophia was not going to refuse the marriage. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.